Retail indexes down over 3.5%. These are really big losses this morning.
Yeah, I was going to say, and no real sign of any reason for them to go anywhere else right now.
Oh, right. I mean, obviously, with the mass quarantine lockdown in northern Italy, those retail hubs are completely going to be decimated for a while. But it's also things like the supply chain, sales elsewhere. This is a global issue at the moment, so it's very difficult to see when the direction will change. Also, other areas that are being hit today, some of those industrial manufacturers and automakers, they all have factories in northern Italy. So Volkswagen, down 6.8% now. BMW down more than 6.5%. Things like Finnish lift manufacturer, elevator company, Cone, they have factories in the suburbs. People have been saying they're down over 5% too.
Right, just saying, actually, across the terminal, the DAX has fallen 7.4%, entering a bear market. So clearly an issues there. Well, let's focus on one particular stock, however, this morning. Tesco. Now, they've sold their Asian unit for $10.6 billion and planning a special dividend. Tell us about that.
Yeah. They are. So they had operations in Thailand and Malaysia, which they've sold, and that's expected to complete sometime later in the year. But they intend to return about £5 billion to shareholders via a special dividend. And it also is planning to, or thinks that this will reduce its debt by making a pension contribution, and that should raise its funding deficit and potentially, protect against future issues there. So that's could be taken as a relatively positive story. Of course, it is hard to tell today in terms of a share price reaction. The broader retail index is for the continent is down 5%. So actually, Tesco's 3.5% down this morning seems fairly muted, in terms of losses. And I think that story is probably helping to bolster the stock there.
Yep, indeed, I think that's right. Moena, thanks very much. Moena Conium there. And I should say that the DAX index is set to enter the bear market at the moment. Similarly, Euro Stoxx 50 falling 4.7%, also set to enter a bear market. So there's a lot going on out there.
Yeah, absolutely. More broadly, the Euro Stoxx 600 down 6%. FTSE 100 dropping almost a full 8 percentage points, with the Xetra DAX down by 7.7%. It follows, of course, the topics going into a bear market. But look, what a rapid change in just 3 weeks from the record highs that we saw in February, and now we're into a significant correction it would seem in the markets. The only thing that I would add is that the Italian FTSE MIB is only dropping by half of 1 percentage point. It looks very, very slow, and that seems to be the outlier versus the other markets. So we'll look into what's going on in the Italian MIB in a moment. Right,
well, let's look at what's lying behind this. To some extent, of course, it's been the turmoil in the oil market. The 31% drop in the oil price came after the disintegration of the OPEC Plus alliance, which triggered an all-out price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Here's Bloomberg's energy reporter, James Thornhill.
The Russian delegation came into the meeting and said, no, this time we're not going to meet you halfway. We're not going to agree to these extra cuts. That's what really triggered this chain of events, which saw the Saudis retaliate by saying, essentially, we're going to open the spigots and let as much oil flow as possible.
And Saudi Arabia slashed its official prices by the most in at least 20 years. It signalled to buyers it would ramp up output to maybe even a record 12 million barrels per day. And Russia said its companies were free to pump as much as they could.
Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs is warning that Brent prices could actually drop to near $20 a barrel. The bank slashed its forecast for the second and third quarters to just $30 a barrel. So that in the oil markets.
Well, let me give you a read. 30.79 is where WTI is right now. 34.7 is where Brent crude is. But the all-out price war is clearly between the largest crude producers has fueled the latest leg of the blistering bond rally. Treasury yields tumbled, with the entire curve trading below 1% for the first time in history. Markets now pricing for the Fed to cut rates to 0% in the coming months.
Yeah, meanwhile, when it comes to the latest on the coronavirus, Italy effectively put a quarter of its population into quarantine over the weekend. Rome has decided to lock down Lombardy and limit movement in neighbouring neighbouring provinces until the 3rd of April, but there are doubts over the degree of enforcement. Deaths in the country surged by 57% on Sunday to 366. The stock market has opened as normal. The FTSE MIB Italian stocks are down only 0.5% right now.
Meanwhile, in the US, the Trump administration is reporting drafting measures to blunt the economic fallout from the virus and help slow its spread. The US State Department has warned Americans with underlying health conditions against travel on cruise ships, citing the higher risk of contracting the virus and complications when infections occur. In Europe, France is stopping public gatherings of more than 1,000 people. As of Sunday, about half the world's countries have reported cases, according to the WHO.
Yeah, meanwhile, here in the UK, of course, the Prime Minister will be holding a COBRA session, which is a sort of an emergency gathering of ministers and health officials and so on, as countries across Europe really try to get to grips with the coronavirus outbreak and think about containment versus mitigation. In Germany, Angela Merkel's government also took its first steps to try to help companies and workers affected by the fallout from the coronavirus outbreak. It will invest an additional 12.4 billion euros between 2021 and 2024, and the coalition loosened rules for short-term work compensation, making it easier for companies to cope with the disruption.
Meanwhile, what's going on in China? Well, earlier this morning, the World Health Organization China representative spoke to Bloomberg and said he's watching closely the effort to return to work in China.
At least one peak has passed, but this is no guarantee that it will remain so, and we have to remain vigilant. There is no room for complacency.
And that was Dr. Gauden Galea, WHO China representative.
OK, those are our top stories all about coronavirus, but let's get all the latest now in global news headlines. Here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans. You have more details when it comes to the health situation.
Yes, good morning, Caroline. We'll start with more details emerging about the effects of the coronavirus. It causes little more than a cough if it stays in the nose and throat. The danger does begin when it reaches the lungs. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
1 in 7 patients has difficulty breathing. 1 in 16 becomes critical. These patients suffer respiratory failure, and some develop septic shock. The infection usually starts in the nose, from droplets expelled in a sick person's cough, sneeze, or breath. If the virus stays in the upper airway, patients are usually okay. But if it makes it down to the lower respiratory tract, then it becomes serious. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg, Daybreak Europe.
North Korea has launched 3 short-range ballistic missiles, according to the South Korean military. Bloomberg's Ji-hae Lee says this raises security concerns as world leaders battle the coronavirus.
So far this year, North Korea has launched 5 projectiles, or ballistic missiles, according to the Japanese government. They flew for about 200 kilometers at an altitude of 50 kilometers off its eastern coast. Analysts say that the launches could indicate Kim Jong-un is at a loss over how he's dealing with the coronavirus outbreak in his country. In Seoul, Ji-hae Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Elsewhere, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz will self-quarantine in his Texas home after coming in contact with a person who has confirmed coronavirus. The 49-year-old says he had a brief conversation and a handshake with the carrier at a recent political event. Medical authorities say those who've interacted with the senator since should not be worried. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Leanne, thanks very much. Well, let's bring you fully up to speed. Italy's FTSE MIB, we were talking about it earlier, it's falling. It's 2% at the moment, set to enter the bear market. This is Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
more than just a game, baseball is big business. For the Atlanta Braves, this meant bringing a $1 billion stadium project to life through a public-private partnership, creating the Battery, a mixed-use development that turned an underdeveloped area into a thriving community.
Always on the cutting edge of community development, Cohn Resnick advises industry participants on tax credits, affordable housing, opportunity zones, and more, helping communities reach their full potential. Explore more at cohnresnick.com/MLB. Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Transform your game.
When you went car shopping, you meant business. You ace vehicle history searches and test drives. You out-salesman the salesman. Now you've got your wheels. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll have the info you need to get more for your future. Go to aceyourretirement.org, because when it comes to speeding past financial challenges, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Influential Conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Emily Chang.
Facebook, the social network that CEO Mark Zuckerberg says is supposed to bring the world closer together, is starting to feel the effects of the virus itself that is forcing the world to stay apart. Joining us to discuss this and much more about the social network is journalist Stephen Levy, who is the author of a brand new opus on Facebook called Facebook, The Inside Story. Stephen, always good to have you here on the show, and congrats on the book. Now, a lot has been made of you getting unprecedented access to Facebook employees, to Zuckerberg, to Sandberg. It makes for some incredible color, but you wonder if that access came with a level of bias towards the company. And how do you respond to the criticism that this isn't the inside story, this is Facebook's side of the story? Right.
Well, there were no strings attached. Facebook didn't see the book until a couple weeks ago. I dropped off a finished version. Too late to change anything, Mark. I think if you're writing something about a company and really wanting to get the full story, how would you turn down the ability to talk to the people and get it from their lips? Now, I've been a reporter for quite a while. I know when I'm being spun. And it wasn't just Facebook people I talked to. I talked to all the people I would have spoken to if I were doing a story from the outside. So it was pure benefit.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing. Time for a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Let's go over to the First Word breaking news desk in Berlin for today's morning call. Here's Richard Jones. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Roger. Asian equities are trading sharply lower across the board today. The Nikkei 225 closed lower by 5.1%, the Kospi lower by 4.2%, with the Shanghai Composite down by 3% and the CSI 300 down 3.4%. For U.S. stock futures, the E-mini S&P and E-mini NASDAQ futures have both been halted at limit down, both lower by just under 5%. European equities are also sharply lower in early trade this morning, with the Eurostoxx 50 down 6.1%, the DAX lower by 7%, the CAC lower by 6.3%, and the FTSE 100 lower by 8.4%. Turning to the bond markets, the U.S. 10-year yield is trading 32 basis points lower at 0.45%, 14 basis points higher than the intraday low, with the 10-year German bond yield 12 basis points lower at -0.83%. In the FX space, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is down by 0.1%, with the Japanese yen and Swiss franc rallying sharply on haven flows, and the Norwegian krona and Canadian dollar leading the G10 laggards, both down sharply with the collapse in oil prices. It's a fairly quiet calendar in terms of European economic data today, with the weekly Swiss sight deposits in focus for any hints at S&B FX intervention last week, in addition to the Eurozone Investor Conference for March. In terms of central bank speakers, the ECB's reign speaks today. That's it from me. For more macro breaking news, it's SQUA Go on the Bloomberg Terminal. Roger?
Thanks so much indeed, Richard. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Leanne.
Roger, good morning. Reports from Riyadh say Saudi authorities have begun releasing royal family members and other officials who were detained in a security clampdown. The arrests were ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and included a brother and a nephew of his father, King Salman. At least two of the detainees have been accused of treason. Observers say the prince's move shows his concerns about potential challenges members within his own family. Police in Hong Kong have arrested 17 people in connection with suspected homemade explosive devices. 12 men and 5 women are being held after weekend raids on 22 properties in the city. Police say they recovered about 1.5 kilos of explosives and a large amount of chemicals. Improvised bombs exploded at 3 locations in Hong Kong between late January and early February. And finally, major supermarkets here in the UK have started rationing some products after shoppers began panic buying over coronavirus fears. Asda, Tesco and Ocado are restricting a variety of things like dry pasta, tinned vegetables, hand wash, soap and toilet roll. On Friday, the government promised that the public will continue to have the food and supplies they do need. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Tech by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans there. Well, we're sort of seeing firsthand, certainly over the weekend, what panic does and whether that actually kind of means that we end up talking ourselves into a recession, which is really dangerous.
Well, I think I didn't feel panicked. I don't know how everyone else did until you actually go into the supermarket. And then there does seem to be a panic that's whipping up lately.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
let's see what happens.
Yeah, the government no doubt will reinforce the message today that consumers should remain calm, that the supermarkets have it under control. Joining us in our London studio, Markets Live strategist Laura Cooper. You're nodding your head. Laura, good morning. Look, away from the kind of supermarket issue and consumers, let's just talk about the markets, shall we? Because we gave the breaking numbers as European stocks opened this morning. US Stock 600 down by over 6%. We're looking potentially at bear markets for most of the big European equity markets. Also in the bond markets here in Europe, we've seen a significant repricing. Italian BTPs jumped 21 basis points. German bond yields slumped 11 basis points. Are we pricing in recession for Europe now?
Well, I think what we're seeing is just this broader flight to safety at this stage. And that's why we're seeing just the spreads with France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, they're all widening against the German bund yield. So quite sharply over the initial period of time. And yes, I would say that markets are certainly pricing for a significant contraction in growth going forward.
And not just in Europe, but in the US as well. We're seeing obviously the extraordinary moment where both 30 years and 10 years treasuries under 1%. Never happened before. I mean, again, potential for a US recession?
I think certainly that's what markets are alluding to. That just the extreme pace of the drop that we're seeing in yields today. I mean, 40 basis point drop on the 10-year alone is quite exceptional in one session. So that is certainly points to a market that is begging for some kind of coordinated policy action from central bankers for greater fiscal stimulus. And if we begin to see these financial conditions tighten even further throughout today's session, we would likely see more of an emergency coordinated action, some rate cuts coming through, likely before the Fed meeting on the 17th and the 18th.
Yeah, very interesting. Obviously, the ECB meeting on Thursday. Look, just to take me to, though, the Italian FTSE MIB. Italy, the centre, really, of the coronavirus, the worst of the coronavirus outbreak in Europe. So, we were obviously eyes, laser focused on the Italian stock market open, but it looked very sort of slow at the start. And then it turns out that actually very few stocks are being traded. Obviously, Milan is one of the cities in lockdown. We're now down 3.8% in terms of Italian stocks, but that's not as bad as elsewhere.
Well, I think when we look at the FTSE MIB, when we look at from its February peaks, it's actually down a lot more sharply than the broader European indices.
Yes.
And so there's likely some catch up that's playing through there. I would expect that some containment measures in Italy is likely assuaged some fears of the spread, whereas we have yet to see that priced fully into the European markets. But certainly going forward today, the fact that Italy's economy is essentially a large part of it is shut down. It is Europe's third largest economy. It's the world's eighth largest economy. So I would expect pressure to build there, notably as we begin to see this greater sell-off pressure across Europe.
And of course, what's driving a lot of this is what's going on in the oil market. And more interestingly, really, in the last half hour or so, we've seen both Brent and WTI stay above $30 the barrel. We saw certainly WTI below that point. Is sense perhaps that the bounce was too big?
Well, I think that's probably the case because we did see quite a significant move since the session opened. It was down more than 30%, which is quite an eye-watering move. So it's likely that we're seeing some catch-up there as kind of markets, as the dust settles, we see kind of taking stock of what the day will shape up to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to Laura Cooper, Markets Live strategist, for joining us throughout this morning as we see these exceptional moves. I just point to Tullow Oil now, worst performer on the US stock 600, slumping 52.1%. So there you have the hit on the big oil companies.
Yeah, and you mentioned the FTSE MIB earlier, now down 4%, so that's building up a bit. The Italian stock market clearly under a lot of pressure, but as you said, perhaps not quite as bad as FTSE 100, down 8.5% at the moment. It's not nice out there. This is Bloomberg.
With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Michael Barr. A stadium employee who worked at a Seattle XFL football game tested positive for the coronavirus. King County health officials say the part-time employee at CenturyLink Field worked at the February 22nd game between the Dragons and Dallas Renegades. Officials say the risk of infection to attendees was low. The San Jose Sharks said that they were approached by the Santa Clara County Public Health Department to call off Thursday's NHL game against the Minnesota Wild to slow the spread of coronavirus. According to the Washington Post, the Sharks refused and the game went on as scheduled. The team says its arena undergoes a rigorous cleaning procedure after each and every event. The Madison Square Garden Company said that a veteran MSG executive would become president and CEO of its sports business following a proposed split. The executive, Andrew Lustgarten, now serves as MSG's president. And that's a Bloomberg Business of Sports report. I'm Michael Barr.
The Bloomberg Business of Sports podcast.
How did the Yankees become this mega valuable team?
Where the money is flowing inside sports around the globe.
From the marketing perspective, where are the dollars spent?
From union heads to team owners, Scott Soshnick and Michael Barr speak to the names that power this multi-billion-dollar industry.
Boston Red Sox CEO Sam Kennedy.
National Hockey League Commissioner Gary Bettman.
Bloomberg Business of Sports. Listen today on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
Portfolio Analyst, powered by Interactive Brokers, helps sophisticated investors understand the health of their complete financial portfolio. Portfolio Analyst is free and easy-to-use personal finance software that creates a consolidated view of banking, brokerage, and credit card accounts. Compare your consolidated portfolio against more than 200 benchmarks or create customized benchmarks for analyzing performance. Calculate time and money-weighted rates of return and use Portfolio Analyst for forecasting. Sign up for free at portfolioanalyst.com.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC, member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
A pact needs someone to follow.
It's got to be important for somebody to have a breakout moment.
Don't look now, but They're behind you.
Imports declined 2.8%.
Bloomberg Daybreak.
Sources tell us that agreement is expected to include commitments on U.S. intellectual property.
With Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager.
Can we see that, please, the results and the forward guidance?
Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Business is like a puzzle.
Make a call given the swirl of data.
Get all the pieces.
We're getting mixed signals from governments.
He's failed to gain traction.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business Radio.com and iHeartRadio apps and BloombergRadio.com. Business is like a puzzle.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. And a very good morning. It's 8:30 a.m. here in London, 9:30 in Paris. I'm Roger Hearing.
And I'm Caroline Hefker. Warm welcome to the programme this morning. Well, carnage, Armageddon, panic. It certainly does seem to be there in the markets this morning. We dropped 6.5% on US stocks at 600 right now. All sectors in the red. The FTSE 100 is down by 8.5%. The Xetra DAX dropped 7.2%. And the Italian FTSE MIB, the MIB, down by 5.5%. Perhaps just a little bit better performing than the rest of Europe because, of course, Italian stocks have dropped so much already as it is the centre point of the coronavirus outbreak here in Europe. Of course, there's a worry that we're going to go into bear market for a lot of these European stocks after the topics went into a bear market overnight. Futures on the S&P 500 index fell about 5%, so that triggered trading curves for the US. In terms of US futures right now, we're still sitting around that level, down by 4.9% in the S&P 500 equity futures. In terms of the bond markets, again, we're seeing this anxiety about recession and just how bad the virus hit what it'll mean for the global markets. US yields on the 10-year dropped 30 basis points and 0.46%. In Europe, German bond yields at negative 82, so dropping 12 basis points. In the UK, we dropped almost 14 basis points on the 10-year, and for the first time, the UK on the 2- and 5-year note goes negative. As for Italian yields, they jumped 18 basis points, 1.25%. We also see gains for Spanish and Portuguese yields jumping 10 basis points there. So there you have it, really. The money's going into the safe haven bunds as opposed to anything else in Europe.
And if you want to know how bad things are on the oil market, Shell shares opened in Netherlands 22% down in Amsterdam. So on to today's top stories. And of course, oil markets have crashed more than 30% after disintegration of the OPEC Plus alliance. It's triggered an all-out price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. At the opening of Asian trading, Brent futures tumbled the most since the first Gulf War. Goldman Sachs is warning prices could drop to near $20 a barrel.
Meanwhile, when it comes to the virus itself, Italy's death toll from the coronavirus is now bigger than South Korea's. Italian authorities say that at least 366 people have died, and there are now more than 7,300 confirmed cases. In the United States, the Grand Princess cruise ship will dock in Oakland in California, and several thousand people on board will be quarantined. The ship has at least 20 cases of coronavirus.
The fears of the virus sent Treasury yields tumbling. The entire curve is now trading below 1% for the first time in history. Markets are pricing for the Federal Reserve to cut rates to 0%. Investors are also piling into other bonds from Japan to Australia.
Meanwhile, in Germany, the government is taking steps to help companies worst affected by the coronavirus outbreak. It is planning to invest an additional 12.4 billion euros between 2021 and 2024. Berlin is also making it easier for companies badly hit by the virus to apply for aid to offset wages. But Roger, it does seem like the drumbeat for more coordinated action is there as we see this severe market reaction.
Right, well, let's get ourselves updated with global news. Here's Leanne Gerrans. And Leanne, you're starting in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, good morning, Roger. Reports from Riyadh say the Saudi authorities have begun releasing royal family members and other officials who were detained in a security clampdown. The arrests were ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and included a brother and a nephew of his father, King Salman. At least two of the detainees have been accused of treason. Observers say the prince's move shows his concern about potential challenges within his own family. Pope Francis has joined Italy's efforts to contain confirmed cases and 233 deaths. Now, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis travels to Berlin today, where he'll meet the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Bloomberg's Paul Tugwell says the two leaders will join those at the Greek-German Economic Forum.
The two leaders will meet on the sidelines of the event, where they're expected to focus on two issues that have arisen since the forum was organized, namely the coronavirus, and specifically its economic fallout. Mitsotakis will also brief Merkel on the latest developments at the Greek-Turkish border, where large numbers of migrants and refugees continue to attempt to cross from Turkey into the European Union. In Athens, Paul Tugwell, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
And Lebanon announced over the weekend that it would default on a €1.2 billion Eurobond that was due today. Bloomberg's Donna Kresh has all the details.
The government wants to negotiate with bondholders to restructure its $30 billion debt, part of its effort to save an economy already facing its worst financial crisis. It remains to be seen whether Lebanon can revamp itself without a bailout from the International Monetary Fund, something bondholders might want to see. Beirut, Donna Kresh, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans. Now, the morning sports news, where coronavirus is even impacting on events. Here's Joe Wilson.
Manchester United manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer believes their 2-0 win over Manchester City yesterday shows them moving in the right direction. The victory over their local rivals took them to within 3 points of fourth place Chelsea, while Chelsea thrashed Everton 4-0 at Stamford Bridge to stay in that final Champions League qualifying. Rangers got back to winning ways with a 1-0 victory at Ross County in the Scottish Premiership yesterday. Ryan Kent's second half goal was enough to ensure Steven Gerrard's side bounced back from defeats against Hamilton at Hearts. Scotland made it back-to-back wins in Rugby Union Six Nations with a convincing 28-17 victory against 14-man France to end the visitors' Grand Slam hopes at Murrayfield. France are now level on points with England in the table, while Ireland could also still win the championship. They have a game in hand due to their fixture against Italy being postponed because of the coronavirus.
Joe Wilson there with all the latest sports news, including the ways in which the virus is affecting it. If you want to see indications of where things are going this morning, Caroline, we've been looking at the oil situation, of course. We're seeing real drops for Shell and Total on the share markets. We're seeing all kinds of issues to do potentially with the oil price going to a point where it begins to affect the politics, of course, because Saudi Arabia and Russia both heavily depend on oil being over a certain price just to keep their governments functioning. And WTI right now, 31.74, Brent crude, 35.9.
Yeah, absolutely. The oil markets crashed some 31% earlier today, but now we're down sort of 20 to 23% in terms of the oil markets. And as you say, having a big impact on the oil majors in Europe, and Tullow oil down a whopping 37%, although it had dropped as much as 52%. So that is the impact. The big oil companies, some of the biggest decliners on the Euro Stoxx 600. Well, joining us now in our London studio, Executive Editor for Energy and Commodities, Will Kennedy. Wow, you must have had a really hair-raising morning this morning for us. Just explain what we should be watching and what you're expecting really now from OPEC+.
I mean, this has been a seismic event for the oil market. When we got together last week, I didn't think anyone expected this to happen. Not only the collapse of the alliance between Russia and Saudi Arabia, but Saudi's response of flashing the price of their own oil and flooding the market. And that's what we're seeing this morning, and it's cascading across all markets. But we're seeing oil countries down, oil down. It's really just a huge event.
I think we can hear you running around, but we'll catch your breath for a moment. I mean, one of the interesting things that seems to be in this is a kind of game of chicken between Saudi Arabia and Russia, because Russia clearly depends on oil price over a certain amount. There are going to be political problems that we already know there are political problems in Saudi Arabia with some of the headlines coming. But who blinks first?
That's a really interesting question, Roger, and here it is MBS and Putin, and they're going head to head, and this is why it's such a compelling story. When you look at the numbers, both countries have reserves of cash to see them through any lower price, and Russia, I think, perhaps has a little more strength, has a more diversified economy. It has squirreled away a lot of money in the last few years in a rainy day fund. It has a much lower break-even price for its budget, around $40 compared to $80 for Saudi Arabia. So perhaps when you look at it, they may be better placed to wait this one out and win the game of chicken. They also have a flexible currency, very importantly, so they can let the ruble feel a bit of a pain here, and that supports their domestic oil producers. Saudi currency is pegged against the dollar. So it's an interesting question. I think most people would say that Russia is in pretty good shape versus Saudi Arabia.
Interesting. And of course, at perhaps one of the most difficult times in the last decade to suddenly have this this matchup between MBS and Putin briefly.
Yes, absolutely. And look, that's the most amazing turn of events here. This alliance has gone cold very, very, very fast.
But we talked about Saudi, we talked about Russia, but of course there are a lot of other countries that depend on the oil price who aren't in this game, but are obviously definitely caught in the crossfire.
And the most important of those is the US. This is a disaster for the US shale industry. It struggles to make money much above $45 a barrel. A lot of those companies are heavily indebted. This is going to be felt as a truly seismic event in Texas. And that's one to watch. So how will Trump respond?
Interesting, watching the Russian ruble dropping 9%. You talked about the pain being perhaps felt through the currency. Thank you so much for dashing in and speaking to us. That's Bloomberg's Will Kennedy speaking to us this morning as we watch the oil markets, dropping 22% for WTI crude futures.
Yes, look at 32.14 is where we find WTI right this second. 36 is where we find Brent crude. In fact, they are on the up a little bit from where they were, but we are talking about a very difficult moment, as we heard from Will, with enormous political ramifications, potentially, given what's been happening, because this is an issue in which the politics matters almost as much as the economics in this. It's been really an extraordinary beginning to the week, crude crashing, and of course the stock plunge, all in the context of the coronavirus spreading and a lockdown of much of northern Italy. So what does this mean for the ability of the international system to deal with a crisis of this magnitude? Well, joining us, I'm very pleased to say now in the studio, it is Tina Fordham, partner and head of global political strategy at Avonhurst, formerly a member of the United Nations high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. Rather important because, of course, yesterday was International Women's Day. But let's start, if we may, Tina. Welcome and good morning to you.
Good morning.
With the virus, people have been describing terrible cliche, the perfect storm, because it does seem to be cutting across markets, politics, and the economy, affecting everything. Is that how you see it?
Very much so. Another perhaps overused piece of jargon is the notion of a black swan event, which is unforeseeable. I've been in the business of looking at how politics intersects with markets and the economy for a couple of decades now. And you can never anticipate the precise trigger, but as this coronavirus is taking hold in late cycle of financial markets, after the longest economic expansion and bull market in many years, a lot of investors asking themselves whether it's 2008 again. In many ways, and whilst I really don't want to be alarmist, this is potentially a much more significant crisis than the debt crisis.
Why is that?
Because of the potential for it to drag down incumbent leaders, because of, in many ways, the kind of post-traumatic stress, if you will, from the debt crisis, whereby passing fiscal stimulus became really taboo. Now we really need that. And policymakers, at least in the advanced economies, have kind of painted themselves into a corner. Plus, why is it worse? Death.
Yes.
The public health.
We shouldn't ignore it.
Unemployment and bankruptcy
were
pretty bad, byproducts of the debt crisis, but you didn't have these quite terrifying projections about deaths in advanced economies. We are, after all, used to bad things happening in faraway places. Not necessarily on our doorsteps.
Which brings me on to the next point that I wanted to make with you, which is the international system. At the moment, it's quite shaky in lots of ways in terms of leaders that perhaps aren't the normal sort of leaders we expect to have in place at this point. A lot of the assumptions about the way the international system operates already somewhat challenged in recent years. Is the international system in a good position to deal with a crisis like this?
No, it's not. However, there's nothing like a crisis to focus minds, especially one where so much of the population might be affected. Having worked previously as an advisor in Number 10, I can tell you that, and this was in completely different historical context, Governments in advanced economies in particular don't like to invest in capacity because they're going to hope that a crisis doesn't occur on their watch. Much better to use your firepower to boost the economy or...
you get no bang for your buck by having equipment in storage,
And it's one thing to say it's a once-in-a-generation crisis. Well, that might be true, but again, it's a bit different from us having a few extra snow days this year, right?
Yeah, look, what is your take in terms of the containment attempts? In Italy, we're talking this morning a lot about how the lockdown has been attempted, a kind of mirror image of what happened in China, but that it's really not working as well as it did in China. How do you read that, obviously, as in terms of your kind of political hat?
Well, it's very important to emphasize that I'm not an epidemiologist, and neither are most of the people who are opining on this crisis. There is unquestionably the fact that in authoritarian regimes, there's more potential to curtail freedom of movement. Italy is now trying this. Italy also has, like many Western countries, a very large cohort of elderly people who are being hit by this crisis. I think their willingness to attempt it really stands out, though, compared to other Western countries. Germany has almost as many cases. We here in the UK have been slower. The US is going to start. The U.S. with its libertarian streak, are people going to, self-isolate? I'm not sure.
I was going to pick up on that briefly because U.S., you are in a situation where, again, you have the global leader not leading in the way it used to, and even dealing with its own crisis. There have been a lot of complaints that it isn't working in the way it should.
Well, from the point of view of looking at crises, a crisis always accelerates the existing trends, right? So this hasn't come out of nowhere. People like the World Economic Forum, who I've worked with in the past, is pandemics and a macro terrorist attack are always on the list of things. But because they are at the back of the FT, if you will, until they move to the front, they're not at the top of the list. But now what we see with the oil price crash stemming from the tensions between Russia, OPEC, and Saudi, North Korea testing a missile, is that whether we want to call it a perfect storm or not, there is an opportunity here for actors with other agendas to try to take advantage of the extent to which leaders are going to be very much focused on this. That might mean Brexit doesn't get done in the way that Boris Johnson might hope, and making America great again might take a bit longer.
I think Mr. Johnson would object to that idea, but thank you so much for your thoughts. Tina Fordham, very interesting conversation, partner and head of global political strategy at Avonhurst, and also a former member of the United Nations High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment. You also go on to Bloomberg Television. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Now we're seeing a continuation of what we expected from the Asian markets. We're now, three-quarters are now into the European opening, and it has to be said there's carnage out there. Stoxx 600 down 6.2%, FTSE 100 down almost 8%, Stoxx 50 down 6.8%, French futures down 7%, DAX futures the same. We're seeing an awful lot of this. FTSE MIB, we were talking about earlier, we were saying it was a slow beginning. We were expecting problems with the Italian stock market. We hadn't seen them. Now we are with a vengeance, down 11.17% as we speak. We're also, of course, seeing the effects in terms of the bonds. We've seen the FTSE MIBs rising dramatically, and all the money seemingly going into bunds. That's where we're seeing them end up. And we're also at the moment looking across to the oil price, which seems to be the cause of a lot of this. 32 points where we're seeing them end up. And we're also at the moment looking across to the oil price, which seems to be the cause of a lot of this. 32.3 is where we find WTI, Brent crude 36.26. And again, also looking at the US bonds, the treasuries, 0.8 is where we find the 30-year, down 40 basis points, and the 10-year, the benchmark, 0.47, that's down 29 basis points. A serious run into that. Also looking at currencies, been a lot of movement there. The US dollar, not a lot of movement has to be said on the Bloomberg Spot Index. However, against the yen, 102.47 is where we find it. And also keeping an eye on cable, which is moving interestingly, going up at the moment. 1.31 is where we find that. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with a global.
Roger, thank you. In Mexico, thousands of people took to the streets in the capital and other cities in a historic march against a femicide. The protesters took place yesterday on International Women's Day to demonstrate against a spate of killings of women and rising gender violence. Protesters spray-painted buildings and dyed fountains red. More than 1,000 women were murdered in Mexico last year. Senator Ted Cruz will self-quarantine in his Texas home after coming in contact with a person who has confirmed coronavirus. The 49-year-old says he had a brief conversation and a handshake with the carrier at a recent political event. Medical authorities say those who've interacted with the senator since should not be worried. Cruz says he has no symptoms and feels, quote, fine and healthy. And sporting events in the UK could be played without fans to contain the spread of the coronavirus. Governing bodies and broadcasters have been called to a government meeting today to discuss how to deal with the outbreak's possible impact on future games and matches. They'll discuss staging them behind closed doors, something Italy has already introduced. The Premier League and EFL have already banned pre-match handshakes. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans there with the World News. Coming up next, our colleagues in the United States are getting ready for Bloomberg Daybreak. So let's check in with Nathan Hager. Good morning, Nathan. What's ahead
Caroline.
for you?
Well, we're just keeping an eye on these numbers. They are stunning this morning, Caroline. Futures overnight on Wall Street hit the 5% down limit. The entire U.S. yield curve is below 1% this morning. If the sell-off in Europe is any indication, we're going to potentially be headed to a historically low open on Wall Street, with an oil price war piling on to ongoing concerns over the coronavirus. We're going to take a look at where this market goes from here. Invesco senior investment strategist Brian Levitt will join us. So will Kit Jukes of Societe Generale. We're also going to have more on the measures the Trump administration is considering to weather the economic blow that this virus is already having in the U.S. Hope you'll join me and Karen Moscow for all that coming up here on Bloomberg Daybreak, America's Caroline.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Bloomberg Daybreak is up next. If you're listening on London DAB digital radio, though, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
Well, the turmoil in international markets we were talking about there is dramatic, with the oil sell-off and bond yields and stocks plunging. How far will this go, and for how long? Well, joining us here in our London studio, I'm very pleased to say, is Karen Ward, Chief Market Strategist EMEA at JP Morgan Asset Management. Karen, welcome and good morning to you.
Good morning.
I suppose the question, we've asked so many questions this morning, one we haven't really asked, I think, is what on earth are investors to do in this kind of situation?
Keep calm, focus on the facts, and I think at this point really keep an eye on what it is that's going to turn sentiment, and that really is in the policy space. So looking to either monetary policy. We're going to hear from the central banks with force. We obviously had an emergency cut already from the Fed. We will get more rate cuts. I think the Fed is increasingly looking like it's going to be taking rates towards the zero bound. The ECB meet this week. We may get some kind of coordinated central bank action. That may help. But really what the market's looking towards is what fiscal policy can be introduced. And I think if we really were to see something support sentiment, lead to a turn, because quite frankly, the best thing, of course, would be the idea that the infection rates are peaking, but that doesn't look on the cards in the next sort of 48 hours. So it really is, I think, looking to policymakers to provide some comfort that they are going to be sufficiently aggressive in the support they provide to small businesses, to households, to make sure that this doesn't prove anything more than temporary when the infection rates peak.
Okay, so then in terms of safe havens, what's best right now? I mean, it looks like just a headlong dive into treasuries. treasuries?
Well, not just treasuries. I mean, I think what's been so interesting over the last, not just the last couple of months, but last year as well, is even European bonds, who you might think those yields couldn't possibly go any lower, still can. You know, you've still seen very significant returns on gilts, on broad European bonds. So I think it is certainly a core bond story. Treasuries I would say probably had past tense, had most scope to cut. But I think it's still core bonds are still doing what you want them to do in a portfolio, which is to go up in price when stocks are falling.
And what about credit in all this? Because we've seen all kinds of issues, apparently there, various warning signs flashing about commercial credit, where it's going in all this, and fears that it may be a real problem.
So I think being very careful and knowing what you're looking at in credit is very important. And the oil news overnight, which clearly is very significant for areas of the high yield market, just adds another area of complication. Over the last decade, we have seen some companies take on too much debt, make too much use of low interest rates, which is fine when the economy was muddling through. Now, when we're looking at an earnings shock, some of those companies will wish they hadn't taken on so much debt. So I think it really is a case of getting into the weeds. What are the companies? What sectors are they in? Will their earnings prove resilient? What's their maturity timeline? And then what support will we get from the central banks? Because let's not forget, if the ECB are in areas of the credit market, for an investor, you've got an escape route that can prove very, very valuable. So I think it's knowing what you're doing in credit. It's very difficult to make broad brush statements, I would say, but quality, absolutely key.
Okay, what about when it comes specifically to the UK? We're expecting the budget on Wednesday, and there's been this debate about whether the new Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is going to go big in terms of spending. He did give an interview over the weekend, different sort of interpretations about what his "I'll tell you more on Wednesday" statements really meant.
Well, I think absent the coronavirus, there was a question of whether the rules were going to be blown out the window, whether he was going to announce significantly more spending, particularly on infrastructure. So I think we were looking at a fiscal expansion. Coronavirus, of course, complicates all of that because he may be forced into the idea of a much greater fiscal expansion in areas that he wasn't focused on. Support for small business, the kind of fiscal response that's required in this type of event is very costly, big amounts of money, but also not the type that he would plan. So they could be rewriting that speech significantly over the next 48 hours.
And a lot of speculation in the Sunday papers that he may in fact need to save the money, build it into a fund for the contingency, because they don't know any more than anyone else does where this is going.
Well, that's right. I think if he was going to blow the rules on an infrastructure programme, maybe that doesn't look the right way to use. I mean, let's be fair that the gilt market is telling him that he's got plenty to spend in many ways. There's lots of investors, as we just discussed, looking for safe havens, wishing to put their money into core government bonds. That will be tempting to him. But I think absolutely what he needs to still stay prudent, given debt levels are high, and really focus on leaving himself space to tackle decisively what he will be required to make sure that this doesn't turn from a temporary virus impact into something of much more prolonged slump.
Yeah, that's absolutely key. How long does this virus last? How bad does it get? Karen Ward, thank you so much for joining us in the London studio. Chief Market Strategy for EMEA at JP Morgan Asset Management.
And next up, we'll be having Daybreak with Nathan Hager and Karen Moscow. Or if you're listening in London on DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keane and Francine Lacroix.
I'll give you a final check of the markets this hour. The US Stock 600 drops by 6%, FTSE 100 down 0.7% this morning as oil prices slump. This is Bloomberg.
Why do so many Fortune 500 and Global 2000 companies count on GEP? Because GEP helps them optimize their procurement and supply chain operations, helping reduce expenses, boost EBITDA, and increase competitiveness. The results are nothing short of amazing. Strategy, software, managed services. GEP brings it all together. GEP, helping the world's best companies do better.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Monday, March 9th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
U.S. stock futures fall by the 5% limit, triggering circuit breakers and leaving traders in the dark.
Oil plunges below $30 as Saudi Arabia and Russia declare a price war on shale.
Currencies and bonds see wild swings as the entire U.S. yield curve trades below 1%.
Coronavirus infections spread to about half the world's countries. Global fatalities reach 3,800. I'm John Tucker. The story straight ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. The day after making a surprising coaching change, the Nets beat the Bulls in Brooklyn. The Knicks beat the Pistons at the Garden.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by SEI. Asset managers can exceed new thresholds for data management, reporting, and responsiveness. Transform your business with SEI's global operating platform at SEIC.com/IMS.
It is 5:01 on Wall Street, and we're seeing massive moves in nearly all asset classes this morning. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 145 points, Dow futures down 1,255, and NASDAQ futures down 410, all down more than 4.8%. The DAX in Germany is down 6.6%, CAC in Paris down 7.2%, FTSE 100 down 7.3%, Nikkei 225 in Japan fell 5.1%, and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong down 4.25%. 10-year Treasury up 2 and 16/32, yield 0.51%. Yield on the 2-year 0.32%. NYMEX crude oil down 21.6%, down $8.92 at $32.35 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.3% or $5 to $16.7730 an ounce. The euro 1.1404 against the dollar, and the yen 102.41. Nathan.
Karen, it promises to be a wild day on Wall Street, but we don't know exactly how wild. Circuit breakers for U.S. stock futures triggered trading limits overnight after declines reached 5%. That has us in the dark on what losses could look like at the open. Garfield Reynolds is a market strategist for Bloomberg.
Volatility is back, and even if implied volatility starts to bleed down a bit, the sticker shock is there, the aftershock, so that's going to make for more cautious trading.
CME rules don't allow stock futures to fall more than 5% from the previous close, and that is keeping the world's most popular equity contracts quiet at the moment.
In Europe, we're seeing the stock 600 down 6.3%, while the MSCI Asia Pacific Index is lower by 4%. Goldman Sachs expects a recovery in the second half, but it's anyone's guess when we see a bottom. Kathy Matsui is the firm's chief equity strategist in Japan.
We think that eventually there will be a bottoming out in earnings revision momentum, and the market can trade higher towards the second half of this year. But everything is so fluid at present, I don't think anybody has a real crystal ball that's accurate enough to predict when the situation situation is going to peak out globally. So, of course, right now there's a great deal of uncertainty. People are trying to hide in safe places.
And those safe places include the Japanese yen, which is strengthening sharply this morning. Right now, dollar yen trading at 102.48.
Now, one catalyst for today's turmoil comes from the oil patch, where an all-out price war is breaking out between Saudi Arabia and Russia. A collapse of the OPEC Plus alliance has the Saudi kingdom making the deepest price cuts in at least 20 years. Katie Bays is co-founder of Sandhill Strategy.
OPEC Plus is at war with itself. They're going to war with U.S. shale. The floor is kind of up for grabs because what the market is trying to figure out now is how low do crude prices have to fall to discourage U.S. producers from pumping more oil. So the question will really be, is $20 low enough?
Well, checking prices now, West Texas Intermediate crude is trading at $32.37 a barrel. That's a drop of 21.7%. Brent is lower by 20.3%, trading at $36.05 a barrel.
The sharp drop in crude has ramifications for emerging markets around the world. Neil Beveridge is senior energy analyst at Sanford Bernstein.
The ripple effects from this are going to be enormous. Think about emerging market economies that are highly leveraged to commodities, Indonesia, Malaysia, Russia, Brazil. And then you go into countries like Iran and Venezuela with the drop-off in exports plus the collapse in oil prices, and the financial ripples that will stem from this are going to be enormous, I think. So while I think the focus today is rightly on energy, I think this is going to broaden out into something far more significant and far more serious.
Currencies tied to commodities are seeing massive weakness this morning from Australia to Norway and Mexico. Right now, the peso is weaker by 5.8%.
The price war will also cause a major shock for U.S. shale producers. We get details from Bloomberg Energy reporter Steven Stepzinski.
If prices stay in this $30 level for a number of weeks, you could start to see actual bankruptcies in U.S. shale producers. There are a number of small companies that their break-even costs are in about the $45 level. And if you see this going on longer, they might either decide to just file for bankruptcy, or they could be soaked up as part of an M&A deal by a bigger player or merge with other folks. So this will have seismic effects going forward if the prices don't firm up in the next few days and weeks.
Energy companies are leading declines in Europe today, while U.S. producers are plummeting in the pre-market. ExxonMobil is down more than 11%. Other producers are much lower.
A flight to safety as bond yields plummeting this morning. For the first time ever, the entire U.S. yield curve is trading below 1%, with markets now pricing for the Fed to cut rates to zero in the coming months. Mark Cranfield is a global macro strategist for Bloomberg.
It looks as though the bond market is talking itself into a recession here, putting yields where they are. And of course, there's a risk that consumers start talking themselves into a recession. If they continue to see financial markets slumping the way that we have, people could get very defensive and it could become self-fulfilling.
And right now, the yield on the 10-year Treasury at 0.51% and the 30-year yield 0.90%.
As panic grips financial markets, the Trump administration's drafting measures to blunt the economic fallout from the coronavirus. Here with details is Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
The planned measures from the White House include a temporary expansion of paid sick leave. That's according to sources who tell us help for companies facing disruption from the outbreak is also being considered. A small group of White House and Treasury officials worked on the proposal over the weekend. The package is still being debated and has not yet been presented to President Trump. The move comes as pressure grows on the administration to take more decisive action in response to the virus. I'm Tom Busby, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Tom, thank you. U.S. futures barely moving after hitting the 5% limit. The S&P futures down 4.8%.
All right, Karen, thanks very much. It's 5:07 on Wall Street. Now it's time to check the latest world and national news headlines with Bloomberg's John Tucker. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nathan. Global fatalities from the coronavirus have reached 3,800 as infections spread to about half of the world's countries. Columbia University, Hofstra University, and Scarsdale, New York, one of the most affluent towns in America, have suspended classes. Columbia is saying it will suspend classes today and tomorrow and hold them remotely for the rest of the week after a person affiliated with the school was exposed to the disease. New Yorkers are also being told to avoid the subway at rush hour by cycling or walking to work or stay home and telecommute, as Mayor Bill de Blasio outlined plans to fight the coronavirus. New York City has 13 confirmed cases. Passengers of the Grand Princess cruise ship, where more than 20 passengers and crew on board are confined to be infected with COVID-19, will be sent to military bases for their mandatory quarantine. Details in this report from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
The Grand Princess is scheduled to
dock in Oakland. The passengers are supposed to get off, leaving the crew of about 1,000 to take the ship itself elsewhere. The captain has given initial information to the 3,500 on board.
If guests don't require acute medical care following health screenings, those who are California residents will go to a federally operated isolation facility within California for testing and isolation.
Plans at last report are still underway, and there's some consternation that local officials haven't been consulted closely enough. There are over 20 people who've tested positive for the virus, and the governor says the offloading could take 2 to 3 days. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, head of the Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, says if you're elderly or infirm, there are a couple of things you simply should not do.
If you're a person with an underlying condition, and you are particularly an elderly person with an underlying condition, you need to think twice about getting on a plane on a long trip. And not only think twice, just don't get on a cruise ship.
He was on NBC's Meet the Press. It can be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Senator Ted Cruz will self-quarantine in his Texas home after contact at a recent political conference with a person who later tested positive for coronavirus. And in other news this morning, Bernie Sanders is making an all-out push in Michigan ahead of that state's primary on Tuesday. The Vermont senator and Democratic presidential hopeful spoke to a crowd of more than 10,000 at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor Sunday night.
Tuesday is a very, very important day, and Michigan is the most important state coming up on Tuesday.
California Senator Kamala Harris endorsed Joe Biden on Sunday, joining several former 2020 Democratic presidential hopefuls who've already backed the former vice president. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, John. 5:10 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update with John Stashower.
Nathan, the Nets made a surprising move Saturday, firing coach Kenny Atkinson with just a month to go in the regular season. So it was Jacques Vaughn, one-time net guard, once the head coach in Orlando, who has moved from assistant to interim head coach in his first game in Brooklyn. The Nets beat Chicago 110-107. Spencer Dinwiddie, high man, 24 points.
They're a very scrappy group. They play really hard. They force a lot of turnovers. So we were a little bit sloppy today. Obviously, a lot of us, our minds are with Kenny. He helped a lot of us out. So the situation is tough, but we have a job to do nonetheless, and we got to come out, try to get wins, and still make it to the playoffs.
They're off to the West Coast for a road trip. Knicks wrapped up a 5-game homestand. They won 3 of the 5. They beat the Pistons at the Garden 96-84, held Detroit to just 13 points in the fourth quarter. Julius Randle scored 22, had 12 rebounds. In Yankee camp, latest injuries to Gary Sanchez, lower back issue not believed to be serious. Unlike Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, Sanchez expected to play opening day. In fact, should return this week. Yanks to split their squads, 5-5 tie with the Orioles, 1-0 win over the Braves as Masahiro Tanaka teamed with 6 relievers on a 2-hitter. Mets beat the Astros 3-1. Noah Syndergaard worked 3 innings, gave up a run, 2 hits for both Pete Alonso and Robinson Cano. Tyrell Hatton held on, won the Arnold Palmer Golf at Bay Hill by 1 shot over Mark Leishman and by 2 over Sungjae Im, who was trying to win back-to-back weeks. Rory McIlroy collapsed yesterday with a final round 76. For the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Why is delivering the best client experience a top priority at BNY Mellon's Pershing? Michelle Feinstein, Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible technology choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step, from onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prove it.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Mother's Day is coming up, so head to your local Asda in London. We've got flowers from £5, thoughtful gifts, unforgettable prices. Don't compromise. Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores subject to availability. Available between 18th and 22nd of March.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
On average, in London, a scooter or motorbike is stolen every hour. Make sure it's not yours. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
From Bloomberg Television, here's Emily Chang.
Facebook, the social network that CEO Mark Zuckerberg says is supposed to bring the world closer together, is starting to feel the effects of the virus itself that is forcing the world to stay apart. Joining us to discuss this and much more about the social network is journalist Stephen Levy, who is the author of a brand new opus on Facebook called Facebook, The Inside Story. Stephen, always good to have you here on the show, and congrats on the book. Now, a lot has been made of you getting unprecedented access to Facebook employees, to Zuckerberg, to Sandberg. It makes for some incredible color, but you wonder if that access came with a level of bias towards the company. And how do you respond to the criticism that this isn't the inside story, this is Facebook's side of the story?
Right. Well, there were no strings attached. Facebook didn't see the book until ago. I dropped off a finished version. Too late to change anything, Mark. I think if you're writing something about a company and really wanting to get the full story, how would you turn down the ability to talk to the people and get it from their lips? Now, I've been a reporter for quite a while. I know when I'm being spun. And it wasn't just Facebook people I talked to. I talked to all the people I would have spoken to if I were doing a story from the outside. So it was pure benefit.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Oil prices are plummeting, equities plunging, and currencies and bonds seeing wild moves as the world heads for a full-blown price war in crude, and panic appears to grip financial markets. S&P futures fell about 5%, triggering trading curbs. They're now down 4.9% on 145 points. Dow futures down 1,196 points, and NASDAQ futures down 410. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. The DAX in Germany is down 5.2%. CAC in Paris down 5.7%. The FTSE 100 down 6.1%. 10-year Treasury up 2 and 19/30 seconds, yield 0.50%. The yield on the 2-year 0.33%. 30-year yield 0.91%. NYMEX crude oil is down 21.5% on $8.85 at $32.43 a barrel. COMEX gold down 0.2% or $3 to $16.69.10 an ounce. The euro 1.1384 against the dollar, British pound 1.3129, and the yen at 102.65. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's John Tucker with more on what's going on around the world. John, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. Cases of coronavirus have surpassed 109,000 worldwide. The deaths now exceed 3,800. The United States is asking Americans to avoid cruise ships as it prepares to move more than 3,000 passengers and crew of the Grand Princess vessel. 2 U.S. lawmakers will face self-quarantine after contact with a person who tested positive for the virus. On the political front, 6 nominating contests will be held tomorrow. Joe Biden's newfound momentum could bring him an insurmountable lead in delegates by mid-March. Sports last night. The Knicks beat the Pistons. The Nets topped the Bulls. The Celtics lost to the Thunder. The Wizards fell to Miami. The Kings lost to the Raptors. And on the ice, the Sharks fall to the Avalanche. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
John Tucker, thank you. It's 5:19 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Brian Levitt joins us this morning, senior investment strategist at Invesco. What a morning this has been already, Brian. As European markets opened, many of them were set to enter bear markets, and futures on Wall Street are barely moving this morning after hitting the 5% limit overnight. Where do you see this market going, particularly in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very fast move, obviously, as expectations get worse than expected. Look, I think ultimately this is starting to get overdone. So, you're in an environment where the global economy was in a weak spot coming out of the trade war. This is a disruption to economic activity that was not needed. You compound that with the news out of Saudi Arabia flooding the world's oil market, and it's a bit of a perfect storm. But ultimately, this is starting to look excessive, and I think that policymakers are going to respond aggressively, and you will start to see some stabilization in markets as we move out some weeks from now. But this is just a very big move into very big fear move into the safest parts of the market.
I'm curious to hear what kind of policy moves you're expecting, because the message we've heard from the administration over the last couple of days is that they're in favor of targeted micro moves on the fiscal front as opposed to something more macro.
Yeah, I mean, look, at some point, policymakers are going to be forced to respond, and we've seen it when pressed, policymakers need to come up with a coordinated response. So that'll be on the monetary side. We will see the Fed work to continue to support the easing of financial conditions to try and support the dollar from strengthening too rapidly against emerging currencies to keep the yield curve from inverting. But you're also going to likely need to see fiscal policy, not only in the United States, but also in Europe. You're going to need to see support for businesses, and you're going to need to see broader support for the economy, and I suspect it's coming.
Markets are pricing in 3 rate cuts from the Fed at their next meeting. Are you looking for more than that?
No, I think that the Federal Reserve is, again, they're going to work to make sure that the yield curve does not invert meaningfully, or that the dollar doesn't strengthen too much against emerging market currencies. So far, today's the first time we've seen the big move in the dollar. The yield curve is real steep. So I think the Federal Reserve is going to act. They're going to act to get the Fed funds rate down below where the 10 and the 30-year are, but I don't think they're going to move significantly more aggressively than that, at least yet.
You said earlier you're seeing signs that this market move is starting to get overdone. Where specifically are you seeing that, and how do you avoid catching a falling knife in some sectors of this market?
Yeah. Look, you already have the 10-year, at 35 basis points. You have the copper-gold ratio back at levels where we saw in the 2008 financial crisis. So, markets are moving very aggressively to price in what looks like an absolute worst outcome from the coronavirus. We know we're going to get beyond this. We just don't know when. We know at some point that the medical community will get beyond this. We've already seen cases peak in China and economic activity look like it's resuming there. So, again, you could call it a falling knife, but the reality is throughout history, we've seen events like this where you have significant moves into risk-free or perceived risk-free assets only for markets to respond over time. I mean, if you look over any 15-year period, stocks are positive 99% of the time. Over any 10-year period, 94% of the time. So we have to remind ourselves that things will get better, things will recover. We're just dealing with a severe disruption in economic activity that was really unexpected and not priced into markets.
Things will get better eventually. In our last 30 seconds here, are you expecting recession at all this year?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like that's where we are, and it looks like the markets have aggressively priced that in. I mean, this was likely to be a year of stable growth amid supportive policy, and unfortunately, this was an exogenous shock that nobody was expecting, and the potential for American consumers to not engage in the service economy for a bit of time here is coming at an inopportune time, and the end of cycle warning indicators are flashing. Mm-hmm. Yields down, dollar strong against emerging market currencies, oil prices down, high yield spreads likely to blow out. So it's looking increasingly like a recession, but the markets are doing a good job of quickly pricing that in.
All right, Brian Levitt, Senior Investment Strategist at Invesco. Thanks for your insights this morning. As we watch futures continue to fall, S&P futures are lower right now by 145 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Fears about the spreading. And now another shock wave about to rip through the world economy. Oil prices are cratering after the dramatic breakdown of talks between OPEC and Russia prompted Saudi Arabia to launch a price war. Oil is down 22% and hovering around $32 a barrel. U.S. stock futures fell about 5%, triggering trading curves designed to limit the most dramatic moves. For central bankers, the prospect of destabilizing prices is adding another complication as they try to model the impact of the coronavirus epidemic on the economy. For the first time, the 10-year Treasury yield fell below 0.5%, and the 30-year yield dropped under 1%. Apple CEO Tim Cook is offering employees at most of its global offices the ability to work from home and called the coronavirus outbreak an unprecedented event and a challenging moment. He told workers at several global offices to work remotely if they could this week. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investment experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/C's Change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions. If morning is not your favorite part of the day, then maybe you're not listening.
What would you expect from Bezos next?
Bloomberg Surveillance.
We finally start to make a move.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to country, Sirius XM Channel 119, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And it's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We're just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures and global stocks are plunging. Circuit breakers for U.S. stock futures triggered trading limits overnight after declines reached 5%. And that has us a bit in the dark on what losses could look like at the open.
Well, meantime, in Europe, the Stock 600 right now is lower by 4.9%. The DAX in Germany is down 5.4%. So is the FTSE in London.
And oil is crashing as an all-out price war breaks out between Saudi Arabia and Russia. A collapse of the OPEC Plus alliance has the Saudi kingdom making the deepest price cuts in at least 20 years. Garfield Reynolds is a market strategist for Bloomberg.
In gold terms, oil is now the lowest it's ever been, basically, lowest since Bretton Woods. So I think we could call this a panic.
And that panic has West Texas Intermediate crude down more than 20% on $8.55. It's at $32.73 a barrel. Brent is down more than 19.5%. It's at $36.39.
And bond yields around the world are tumbling. In the UK, 2-year yields have gone negative, while yields in Germany and France push deeper into negative territory. Paya Sachiteva is an economist at Schroders.
We do expect the ECB to embark stimulus measures on Thursday beyond even just a 10 basis point rate cut, but likely some targeted measures from SMEs, potentially expanding their current quantitative easing program. But beyond that, we're going to need essentially a bazooka now, I think, to assuage markets in this current environment.
In the U.S., the entire yield curve is trading below 1% for the first time ever as markets expect the Fed to cut rates to zero in the coming months. Richard Jones is an FX and rates strategist for Bloomberg.
There's now roughly another 100 basis points of easing priced between
between now and the end of the year, with the market pricing about 75 basis points of these rate cuts to happen in the coming weeks. So very aggressive, very front-loaded.
Right now, the yield on 2-year treasuries trading at 0.32%. 10-year yields are currently at 0.48%, and the 30-year yield 0.88%.
And as panic grips financial markets, the Trump administration is drafting measures to blunt the economic fallout from the coronavirus. Here with details is Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
The measures would include a temporary expansion of paid sick leave and help for companies facing disruption from the outbreak. That's according to sources who tell us a small group of officials worked on the proposal over the weekend. The package is still being debated and has not yet been presented to President Trump. I'm Tom Busby, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Tom, thank you. And again, S&P futures are down 145 points, down 4.9% right now. Dow futures down 1,255. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thanks a lot. It's 5:33 on Wall Street, and John Tucker is here with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, John.
Nathan, good morning. The U.S. death toll from coronavirus has hit 21 as testing increases. The number of infections in the United States climbs above 500. The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director, Dr. Anthony Fauci, cautions a vaccine is likely a year or more away.
For now, the answer is not going to be a vaccine. If, in fact, we go into a cycle where we come back next year, then we likely would have some opportunity for a vaccine.
Governor Andrew Cuomo says more than 100 people have tested positive for coronavirus in New York State. He complains one of 7 labs in the state with test kits isn't approved by federal officials.
CDC has not authorized the use of this lab, which is just outrageous and ludicrous.
The largest concentration of cases in New York is in Westchester County, and New York City officials say residents should avoid the subway at rush hour. The new coronavirus causes little more than a cough if it stays in the nose and throat. The danger begins when it reaches the lungs. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more in this report from Hong Kong.
1 in 7 patients has difficulty breathing. 1 in 16 becomes critical. These patients suffer respiratory failure, and some develop septic shock. The infection usually starts in the nose, from droplets expelled in a sick person's cough, sneeze, or breath. If the virus stays in the upper airway, patients are usually okay. But if it makes it down to the lower respiratory tract, then it becomes serious. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Daybreak.
California Governor Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Oakland seeking to reassure the public that none of the passengers from a ship with at least 21 cases of the new virus will be released into the public before undergoing a 14-day quarantine. And 2 members of Congress, Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Paul Gosar, say they're isolating themselves after determining they had contact at a political conference with a man who's tested positive for coronavirus. And on the political front, Joe Biden's newfound momentum could bring him an insurmountable lead in delegates by mid-March, buoyed by primary wins on Super Tuesday. Biden's now well-positioned to extend his delegate advantage over Bernie Sanders at the 6th nominating contest to be held tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thank you, John. It's 5:35 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update with John Stashower.
Nathan, Knicks and Nets both with home victories. They both now have interim head coaches. Mike Miller's been on the job for 3 months. Last night at the Garden, he coached the Knicks to a 96-84 win over Detroit. Miller happy to see his team allow only 13 points in the fourth quarter.
So I was pleased with the effort, certainly, and then just staying with the defensive side of it and trusting that and allowing the defense to help create some offense.
From Julius Randle, he scored 22. Knicks get to 20 wins on the season. That's some progress. They only had 17 last year. The Nets made the playoffs last year, and despite a sub-500 record, almost certainly headed back. But Kenny Atkinson, no longer the coach, in what they call the mutual parting of the ways. Assistant Jacques Vaughn has taken over. In his first game, the Nets beat Chicago at Barclays 110-107. Spencer Dinwiddie, 24 points. Joe Harris and Karis LeVert both scored 23. What a weekend for the Lakers. They beat the league-leading Bucks, and then yesterday down the Clippers, who they had lost to twice this season. 112-103. LeBron James scored 28. Injured much of last season, but at age 35, LeBron playing like an MVP.
I put a lot of work into my game this offseason. I put a lot of work into my rehabbing, with my groin, getting back to full strength. Even when I was shooting the movie out, if you follow me on social media, I was in the weight room at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning was preparing myself for this season, no matter what was going on, just keeping the main thing.
Lakers have won 11 of the last 12 in Florida. Noah Syndergaard and the Mets beat the Astros 3-1. Masahiro Tanaka and the Yankees 1-0 over the Braves. Gary Sanchez's back injury, not believed to be serious, should return this week. The Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. I'm John Stashower. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. It's 5:37 on Wall Street. The latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is on newsstands now. The cover story is a profile of White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow. Sean Donnan wrote it for Bloomberg Business Week.
He has this office in the West Wing, which feels like you're stepping into an old-school gentleman's club. He sits at the end of a dining table. There's no computer or TV in his office. It's an old-fashioned pile of papers, printed out emails.
Read more about this and other stories in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands now and online at businessweek.com. Terminal customers can get a complimentary subscription at MAG Go. And listen to Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly right here on Bloomberg Radio. Watch it on YouTube, weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Get global business, finance, and tech news on your TV, computer, or mobile device. Just visit youtube.com and search Bloomberg Global News. It's 5:38 on Wall Street. Time now for the Tri-State Business Report. Bloomberg's Joan Doniger. Good morning, Joan.
Good morning, Nathan. Neighbors aren't sold on the master plan for development of the Sunnyside Yard project in Queens. The city says the project promises 12,000 units of affordable housing and green space built on top of a deck on top of the massive rail facility. But neighbors think it's a mistake for the public and railroad to pay the almost $14.5 billion bill for the infrastructure. They're organizing to push back. The MTA is looking at easing some of the public transport crush on Staten Island with a high-speed bus link from the borough to Newark Airport. The city says the agency's outlined a pair of potential routes. The Tottenville to Newark Liberty is among them, part of its West Shore transit analysis. And tenants at Stuyvesant Town and Peter Cooper Village are suing to block the complex's landlord from deregulating thousands of apartments. Curb New York says about 6,200 rent-regulated apartments in the complex could face deregulation come July. With the Tri-State Business Report, I'm Joan Doniger. Nathan?
Okay, Joan, thank you. 5:39 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Steve Podoskan on KNX in Los Angeles. We're talking about Apple offering almost all of its employees a work-from-home option.
I'm Courtney Donahoe on KTRH in Houston. Oil crashes in an all-out price war with Saudi Arabia and Russia.
I'm Caroline Hepker on Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London. We're reporting on Prime Minister Johnson's emergency COBRA meeting of senior ministers as Britain tries to navigate the coronavirus outbreak.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and on WBBM in Chicago, I'm reporting that there's another problem for Boeing as it works to get the grounded 737 MAX back into production and back in the air.
Those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. Also keeping an eye on corporate earnings this week, though results are sparse. Only about 6 companies in the S&P 500 are reporting, but they are names you know. We'll hear from the Gap, Adobe, Broadcom, Dollar General, and Oracle. Bloomberg customers can check the full earnings calendar on the terminal by typing ACDR Go. S&P futures lower by 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255. NASDAQ futures down 410 points.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, Managing Director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and Head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE SIPC.
Vodafone 5G will have the power to change your world. From driverless cars to virtual reality and real-time gaming. That's why we're rolling out 5G across the UK. Discover Vodafone 5G on the UK's best mobile data network. The future's exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
NPerf testing awarded Vodafone Best 2019 Mobile Internet Performance based on 35,664 tests on the NPerf app in the UK. Coverage may vary. Visit vodafone.co.uk.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
On average, in London, a scooter or motorbike is stolen every hour. Make sure it's not yours. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
We've all been in one, but how much do you really know about black cabs? For instance, did you know that a black cab has to be tall enough to accommodate an individual wearing a bowler hat? That's a lot of space for you and your briefcase. Or that Free Now drivers can use the bus lanes, the perfect getaway to make your meeting in time. And with 2-minute central London pickups, you needn't waste time searching for a taxi. Just download the Free Now app today and take the hassle out of getting round London.
Okay, Sergey, screen 4. What are we watching?
It's a surprise.
What? Where are we? Oh, who's this woman? Is this a musical?
What is this vision I see in front of me?
Could this be my moment? It's happened finally.
Sergey, we both know you don't have the vocal range for this. Enjoy endless adventures with 2-for-1 cinema tickets from Meerkat Movies when you buy through Compare the Market.
Qualifying purchases Tuesdays or Wednesdays. Participating cinemas, 2 standard tickets only. Cheapest ticket free. T's and C's apply.
Do you go on the same holiday every year? To the same country, in the same hotel, with the same sea view? Visit the same ancient monuments, lay by the same dolphin-shaped pool, meet the same Barrys and Sandras, and wear the same Hawaiian shirt that you'd never wear at home. Then maybe it's time to switch it up, starting with the all-new Vauxhall Corsa, with its bold styling and up to 70 miles per gallon. To switch it up, visit your local Vauxhall dealership or search New Corsa. Official WLTP test figures for comparison purposes only. Real-world figures may vary.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
2 members of Congress are isolating themselves this morning after determining they had contact with a man who has tested positive for the coronavirus. Correspondent Kristen Holmes says Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz shook hands with the man 2 weeks ago at the Conservative Political Action Conference. She has his statement.
Out of an abundance of caution and because of how frequently I interact with my constituents as a part of my job and to give everyone peace of mind, I have decided to remain at my home in Texas this week until a full 14 days have passed since the CPAC interaction.
Republican Congressman Paul Gosar says he had a lot of contact with a man at CPAC as well. He said he and 3 members of his senior staff are under self-quarantine. Oil prices have dropped by 1/3 in trading in Europe today. U.S. oil dropped 10% on Friday, the biggest loss in more than 5 years. And stock futures in the U.S. are now down between 1 and 2%. It looks like another tough day ahead on Wall Street. I'm Christopher Cruz.
They don't just talk to the most important people.
Is it as ominous this time around?
They talk with the most interesting people.
Are they taking this seriously?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Oil prices are plummeting, equities are plunging, and currencies and bonds are seeing wild moves as the world heads for a full-blown price war in crude, and panic appears to grip financial markets. S&P futures fell about 5%, triggering trading curbs. They are now down 4.9% on 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255, and NASDAQ futures down 410. The DAX in Germany down 5.4%. The CAC in Paris down 6%. FTSE 100 down 6.1%. 10-year Treasury up 2 and 23/32. The yield 0.49%. The yield on the 2-year, 0.32%. 30-year yield, 0.88%. NYMEX crude oil is down more than 19% on $7.91 at $33.37 a barrel. COMEX gold down 0.4% or $6.50 at $16.66 an ounce. The euro, 1.1387 against the dollar. The yen, 102.52. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's John Tucker with more on what's going on around the world. John.
And good morning, Karen. Mayor Bill de Blasio says New Yorkers should avoid the subway at rush hour, cycle or walk to work, or stay at home and telecommute. New York City has 13 confirmed cases of coronavirus. The state has 105. Columbia University suspended classes today and tomorrow. Hofstra canceled classes, and all Scarsdale schools will close through March 18th. Senators Ted Cruz and Paul Gosar will self-quarantine after attending a conference with someone who tested positive. Ahead of tomorrow's primary contest, Kamala Harris has endorsed Joe Biden, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson has endorsed Bernie Sanders. Sports, Knicks beat the Pistons. Nets topped the Bulls. The Celtics lost to the Thunder. The Wizards fell to Miami. The Kings lost to the Raptors. And on the ice, the Sharks were beaten by the Avalanche. Global news 24 hours a day on air and a quick take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thank you, John. We're live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, where it's 5:49 on Wall Street. Let's bring in our next guest now. Kit Jukes joins us, Chief FX Strategist at Societe Generale. As we continue to watch the sell-off in equities this morning, Kit, we've seen some pretty stunning moves in the currency markets as well. What's got your attention most this morning?
The biggest moves were, to some degree, predictable in the sense that the Japanese yen, which always benefits from a crisis, given their position as the biggest investor globally, holder of foreign assets globally, that's up again 2% against everything. At the other extreme, although they don't trade it much at this time of day, the Mexican peso is down against everything. The weakest currencies are all big oil exporters. So Mexico, Norway, Canada, Russia are all going to feel the effects of the oil price move, which is absolutely more important to everybody in terms of markets this morning than the coronavirus. The yen's the big safe haven, and the surprise is the euro. A lot of people are asking me already, why is the euro stronger on this? But again, still short covering and still reflecting the fact that the Federal Reserve just has more room to ease than the ECB.
Yeah, we've started to see futures markets price in at least 3 rate cuts from the Federal Reserve next week. Is that what you're thinking, or what further easing could we see from the U.S. Central Bank?
I think at some point we're going to be pricing in too much, but why wouldn't they come in with another 50 basis points quite quickly? On the same logic as the previous one. There is a question, going to be asked about saving ammunition, and we only have to go back to Friday's labor market report to say before all of this happened, the U.S. economy was holding up very well compared to everywhere else. But we may feel more differently when we've seen how the high-yield corporate bond market opens up in the United States this afternoon, and so on, and how deep this effect gets. Definitely, there's a risk of a crisis of confidence coming through here. And if you've got the room to ease, whether you ease before next week's FOMC 50 basis points at, or, how you do it, frankly, they'll end up easing a fair bit more before we're done, I think.
How much confidence can we expect the Fed to give this market, given that the emergency cut last week didn't seem to instill much of that among investors? Are we going to need to see a more coordinated response? And what are the chances of that?
Well, I think we need a more coordinated response from a more fiscal response. You know, I mean, the sense certainly with the virus is that fiscal policy is more effective than monetary policy, or that targeted monetary policy to solve the problem of the folks who have cash flow problems coming from this specific set of events, that they were going to need more help, and that monetary policy is a somewhat blunt tool for some of this stuff. So, I think the Fed's argument has been, we can do what we can do, and we should certainly send out a message. And I'm not sure why that would change, but no, you can't directly fight the hit to confidence from a virus with lower rates, and you can't directly offset it. And equally, by the same token, when we get a world where oil prices are tumbling, and you're getting some countries being hurt enormously, and some people perhaps potentially down the road benefiting, it's not clear that lower rates are some kind of magic panacea. But the pushback from everybody I know when you say, is there any point, is, well, central banks have to do what they can do. They can't do, doing nothing and just being like an ostrich won't help. So I don't think that we can alter the fact that we're in for a period of globally weaker growth from this point in time, and that the main thing to solve is the human impact of the coronavirus, and the secondary thing to solve is something orderly in oil.
Thanks for this, Kit. Always good having you on. Kit Jukes is Chief FX Strategist at SocGen. Karen?
Nathan, thank you. 5:53 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Law Report, brought to you by American Arbitration Association. Business disputes are inevitable. Resolve faster with the American Arbitration Association, the global leader in alternative dispute resolution for over 90 years. More at adr.org. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
The AFL-CIO has asked a federal court to block a Trump administration rule that would likely make it harder for unions to organize by revising the union election process. The 11th Circuit ruled that claims accusing State Farm automobile insurance of illegally shortchanging Mississippi, Indiana, and Utah body shops cannot proceed, and the 9th Circuit has canceled en banc hearings and all non-case-related meetings scheduled for this week because of coronavirus concerns.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need, all on one legal research platform, including guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now in broader legal news, it looks like the U.S. Supreme Court is set to decide its first abortion case in 4 years, a challenge to a Louisiana law requiring clinic doctors to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. For more on the case, Bloomberg's June Grasso speaks with Steve Sanders, a professor at Indiana University's Maurer School of Law.
Steve, in 2016, the court struck down a Texas law that's nearly identical to this Louisiana law. So shouldn't that be precedent here?
Well, that's what many people think. Many people were very surprised when the court agreed to hear this case. In 2016, in a case known as the Whole Women's Health case, the Supreme Court struck down a couple of different Texas laws, which everybody knew had been passed in an effort to try to close abortion clinics, to make it more difficult for abortion clinics to operate. The Supreme Court, by a 5-3 decision in that case, struck those down, basically saying those imposed a substantial obstacle to a woman's ability to get an abortion without providing any benefit. But Louisiana had passed a similar law 2 years earlier, and after the Louisiana law was challenged, a federal district court struck down Louisiana law, basically saying this is essentially what the Supreme Court decided in Whole Women's Health. But the Fifth Circuit, the Court of Appeals, found some fairly narrow, fine-grained differences between the situations in Louisiana and Texas. And so it upheld the law, and that's how we got to the Supreme Court arguments.
In the Texas case, Justice Roberts was in the dissent. Where does that leave him now?
You're right. Chief Justice Roberts would have upheld the Texas law. In this case, he voted with the court's progressive justices to at least put a hold on the Court of Appeals decisions until the Supreme Court can decide. I think Chief Justice Roberts here faces a choice. On the one hand, his vote in the Texas case in 2016 indicates he thinks there should be greater ability for states to regulate and put obstacles in the way of women's ability to get abortion. On the other hand, we know from his votes in previous cases that the Chief Justice Roberts, as the Chief Justice, also worries about the court's institutional legitimacy, its credibility, whether it is perceived as a political body or a judicial body. And so I think he's going to face a sort of internal tug of war to go with his ideological beliefs about what the law should be in this case, versus if he ends up deciding that the cases are just too similar and it would look, frankly, shocking for the court to effectively overturn one of its own decisions after only 4 years, that might lead him to actually vote to strike down the Louisiana law.
And that's Steve Sanders, a professor at Indiana University's Maurer School of Law, speaking with Bloomberg's June Grasso. Catch more of that interview plus analysis of the latest legal news by subscribing to the Bloomberg Law Podcast or downloading the show at Bloomberg.com/podcast. And attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com. S&P futures down 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255. NASDAQ futures down 410. And NYMEX crude oil is down 19%. Bloomberg Daybreak continues. This is Bloomberg.
Switch to Sky Broadband Superfast. It's so reliable, we'll guarantee your speeds or money back. And for a short time only, it's just £25 a month for 18 months with a $19.95 setup fee. So stay connected with super reliable, super fast broadband at a super low price. Switch or recontract today. Search sky.com. Offer ends 12th of March. Prices may change during this period. Includes Sky Pay As You Talk. Sky Fibre areas only. Speeds vary by location. 1 month subscription refund if speeds drop below minimum download speed for 3 consecutive days. Claim twice in minimum term after first 14 days. See sky.com/guarantee.
The Mona Lisa is only 30 inches tall. The world's hottest chili, 1 inch. And Napoleon, taller than a Great Dane, but only by 71 centimetres. Who says small can't make an impact? The Peugeot 108 Allure is now available for just $159 per month, with $159 initial rental. Our small but mighty car that doesn't have to cost you a small fortune. Peugeot Motor Company PLC, a credit broker not a lender, will introduce you to PSA Finance UK Limited. Personal finance lease, 48 months at 159, 18 plus, guarantee may be required. Terms, eligibility and return conditions apply. You will not own the car.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL Scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
At Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Monday, March 9th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
U.S. stock futures fall by the 5% limit, triggering circuit breakers and leaving traders in the dark.
Oil plunges below $30 as Saudi Arabia and Russia declare a price war on shale.
Currencies and bonds see wild swings as the entire U.S. yield curve trades below 1%.
Coronavirus infections spread to about half the world's countries. Global fatalities reach 3,800. I'm John Tucker. The story straight ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. The day after making a surprising coaching change, the Nets beat the Bulls in Brooklyn. The Knicks beat the Pistons at the Garden.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by Portfolio Analysts, powered by Interactive Brokers. Savvy investors use Portfolio Analysts to create a consolidated view of their finances and check the health of their complete financial portfolio. Sign up for free at PortfolioAnalyst.com.
It is 6:01 on Wall Street. We're seeing massive moves in nearly all asset classes this morning, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255, and NASDAQ futures down 410. The DAX in Germany is down 5.9%. CAC in Paris down 6.5%, and the FTSE 100 down 6.4%. Nikkei 225 in Japan fell 5.1%, and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong down 4.25%. 10-year Treasury up 2 seconds. The yield 0.48%. Yield on the 2-year 0.32%. 30-year yield 0.88%. NYMEX crude oil's down 19.4% on $8.05 at $33.14 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.4% or $6.60 at $16.65.70 an ounce. The euro 1.1402 against the dollar. The yen 102.42. And this data check brought to you by Withum, a forward-thinking, technology-driven advisory and accounting firm helping clients be in a position of strength in today's modern business landscape. Visit Withum.com to learn more. Nathan.
Karen, it promises to be a wild day on Wall Street, but we don't know exactly how wild. Circuit breakers for U.S. stock futures triggered trading limits overnight after declines reached 5%. It's got us in the dark on what losses could look like at the open. Garfield Reynolds is a market strategist for Bloomberg.
Volatility is back, and even if implied volatility starts to bleed down a bit, the sticker shock is there, the aftershock, so that's going to make for more cautious trading.
CME rules don't allow stock futures to fall more than 5% from the previous close, and that's keeping U.S. equity contracts quiet for the moment.
In Europe, we're seeing the Stock 600 down 5.9%, while the MSCI Asia Pacific Index is lower by 4%. Goldman Sachs expects a recovery in the second half, but it's anyone's guess when we see a bottom. Kathy Matsui is the firm's chief equity strategist in Japan.
We think that eventually there will be a bottoming out in earnings revision momentum, and the market can trade higher towards the second half of this year. But everything is so fluid at present, I don't think anybody has a real crystal ball that's accurate enough to predict when the situation is going to peak out globally. So, of course, right now there's a great deal of uncertainty. People are trying to hide in safe places.
And those safe places include the Japanese yen, which is strengthening sharply this morning. Right now, dollar yen trading at 102.35.
Now, one catalyst for today's turmoil comes from the oil patch, where an all-out price war is breaking out between Saudi Arabia and Russia. A collapse of the OPEC Plus alliance has the Saudi kingdom making the deepest price cuts in at least 20 years. Katie Bays is co-founder of Sandhill Strategy.
OPEC Plus is at war with itself. They're going to war with U.S. shale. The floor is kind of up for grabs because what the market is trying to figure out now is how low do crude prices have to fall to discourage U.S. producers from pumping more oil. So the question will really be, is $20 low enough?
Well, right now, West Texas Intermediate crude's at $32.88 a barrel. That's down 20.4%. Brent is lower by 19.3%, trading at $36.49 a barrel.
The sharp drop in crude has ramifications for emerging markets around the world. Neil Beveridge is a senior energy analyst at Sanford Bernstein.
The ripple effects from this are going to be enormous. Think about emerging market economies that are highly leveraged to commodities, Indonesia, Malaysia, Russia, Brazil, and then you go into countries like Iran and Venezuela with the drop-off in exports plus the collapse in oil prices, and the financial ripples that will stem from this are going to be enormous, I think. So while I think the focus today is rightly on energy, I think this is going to broaden out into something far more significant and far more serious.
Commodity currencies are seeing massive weakness from Australia to Norway and Mexico. Right now, the peso is weaker by more than 5.5%.
The price war will also cause a major shock for U.S. shale producers. We get details from Bloomberg Energy reporter Steven Stabzinski.
If prices stay in this $30 level for a number of weeks, you could start to see actual bankruptcies in U.S. shale producers. There are a number of small companies that their break-even costs are in about the $45 level. And if you see this going on longer, they might either decide to just file for bankruptcy, or they could be soaked up as part of an M&A deal by a bigger player or merge with other folks. So this will have seismic effects going forward if the prices don't firm up in the next few days and weeks.
Energy companies are leading declines in Europe, while U.S. producers are plummeting in the pre-market.
A flight to safety as bond yields plummeting. For the first time ever, the entire U.S. yield curve is trading below 1%, with markets now expecting the Fed to cut rates to zero in the coming months. Mark Cranfield is a global macro strategist for Bloomberg.
It looks as though the bond market is talking itself to a recession here, putting yields where they are. And of course, there's a risk that consumers start talking themselves into a recession. If they continue to see financial markets slumping the way that we have, people could get very defensive and it could become self-fulfilling.
Right now, the yield on 10-year treasuries is trading at 0.47%. The yield on the 30-year, 0.87%.
And as panic grips financial markets, the Trump administration is drafting measures to blunt the economic fallout from the coronavirus. Here with details is Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
The planned measures from the White House include a temporary expansion paid sick leave. That's according to sources who tell us help for companies facing disruption from the outbreak is also being considered. A small group of White House and Treasury officials worked on the proposal over the weekend. The package is being debated and has not yet been presented to President Trump. The move comes as pressure grows on the administration to take more decisive action in response to the virus. I'm Tom Busby, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Tom, thank you again. S&P futures down 4.9% right now, down 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. And this is Bloomberg.
All right, thank you, Karen. 6:07 on Wall Street. John Tucker's here with on what's going on around the world. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nathan. Global fatalities for the coronavirus reached 3,800 as infections have spread to about half of the world's countries. Columbia University, Hofstra University, and Scarsdale, New York, one of the most affluent towns in America, suspended classes. Columbia says it will suspend classes today and Tuesday and hold them remotely for the rest of the week after a person affiliated with the school was exposed to the disease. New Yorkers should avoid the subway at rush hour by cycling or walking to work or stay at home and telecommute as Mayor Bill de Blasio outlined plans to fight the coronavirus. New York City has 13 confirmed cases. Passengers of the Grand Princess cruise ship, where more than 20 passengers and crew on board are confirmed to be infected with COVID-19, will be sent to military bases for their mandatory quarantine. Details in this report from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
The Grand Princess is scheduled to dock in Oakland. The passengers are supposed to get off, leaving the crew of about 1,000 to take the ship itself elsewhere. The captain has given initial information to the 3,500 on board.
If guests don't require acute medical care following health screenings, those who are California residents will go to a federally operated isolation facility within California for testing and isolation.
Plans at last report are still underway, and there's some consternation that local officials haven't been consulted closely enough. There are over 20 people who've tested positive for the virus, and the governor says the offloading could take 2 to 3 days. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, head of the Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, says if you're elderly or infirm, there are a couple of things you simply should not do.
If you're a person with an underlying condition, and you are particularly an elderly person with an underlying condition, you need to think twice about getting on a plane on a long trip. And not only think twice, just don't get on a cruise ship.
He was on NBC's Meet the Press. It can be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Senator Ted Cruz will self-quarantine in his Texas home after contact at a recent political conference with a person who later tested positive for coronavirus. And in other news this morning, Bernie Sanders is making an all-out push in Michigan ahead of that state's primary on Tuesday. The Vermont senator and Democratic presidential hopeful spoke to a crowd of more than 10,000 at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor Sunday night.
Tuesday is a very, very important day, and Michigan is the most important state coming up on Tuesday.
California Senator Kamala Harris endorsed Joe Biden on Sunday, joining several former 2020 Democratic presidential hopefuls who have already backed the former vice president. Global news 24 hours a day, on the air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. It's 6:10 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Here's John Stashower.
Nathan, the Nets made the surprising move Saturday, parting ways with Coach Kenny Atkinson. It was just a month ago in the regular season, so it was Jacques Vaughn, one-time net guard, once the head coach in Orlando, who has moved from assistant to interim head coach. His first game in Brooklyn, Nets beat the Bulls 110-107. Spencer Dinwiddie, high man, 24 points.
They're a very scrappy group. They play really hard. They force a lot of turnovers. So we were a little bit sloppy today. Obviously, a lot of us, our minds are with Kenny. He helped a lot of us out. So the situation is tough, but we have a job to do. nonetheless, and we got to come out, try to get wins, and still make it to the playoffs.
They're off to the West Coast for a road trip. The Knicks also hit the road. They wrapped up a 5-game homestand, beating the Pistons at the Garden 96-84, held Detroit to just 13 points in the fourth quarter. Julius Randle scored 22, had 12 rebounds. The Knicks went 3-2 in the home games. At Yankee camp, the latest injury to Gary Sanchez, lower back issue, not believed to be serious, unlike Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. Sanchez expected to play opening day. In fact, should return this week. Yanks split their squads. 5-5 tie with the Orioles. 1-0 win over the Braves as Masahiro Tanaka teamed with 6 relievers on a 2-hitter. Mets beat the Astros 3-1. Noah Syndergaard worked 3 innings, gave up a run, 2 hits for both Pete Alonso and Robinson Cano. Also in Florida, the first PGA win for 28-year-old Brit Tyrell Hatton at Bay Hill. He survived a double bogey on the 11th hole, parred the last 7 holes, won by a shot over Mark Leishman. With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower. Nathan?
All right, John. U.S. futures lower by 4.8% or more across the board. S&P futures down 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255 points.
Vatsal Shah is Senior Project Engineer at Mott MacDonald, a global engineering consultancy with more than 16,000 employees. He earned his Ph.D. at New Jersey Institute of Technology, and as an adjunct professor is helping NJIT students explore emerging technologies.
My focus is renewable markets, emerging technologies, the idea of floating cities. What are we doing to develop that? What will happen to the city on the water? Well, you're going to have waves hitting it. You're going to have solar. How are you going to develop plants? How are you going to develop vegetation and farming? That sort of thought process happens at NJIT. We actually plan out what will the city look like. How do we develop that? So in 10 years, we're actually ready to take on those challenges when we have our first development in the water. NJIT also has been doing a lot of work in self-healing materials, so taking the polymers and the new material that we have in our material sciences departments and putting them into things like concrete, things like steel, reinforcing our soil.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad.
Delayed at the dentist and now you're late for school pickup. You need a free now. Need to take the dog to the vet before lunch. Should have gotten a free now. Trying to get 4 kids and their baggage to the airport. Free now. Sometimes you can't get from A to B fast enough. Download the Free Now app today for quick pickups and reliable drivers, no matter the situation. Less hassle, more hustle with Free Now.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
There's a new arrival turning up the heat. Celebrity X on the Beach, the podcast, brings you exclusive behind-the-scenes gossip from the show's celebrity cast.
Joey falls in love quick. That was love at first sight, literally.
Each week, we'll be talking with extra special guests, breaking down the breakups and makeups of each episode as it unfolds.
I walk into the villa and boom, I'm straight into an ex.
Celebrity X on the Beach, the podcast. New episode available every week after the main show. Listen and subscribe on Global Player and all podcast platforms.
Matt Letizia, what did you make of that performance today?
Well, it really was a game of 2 halves, to be honest, Jeff. Leicester came out in the first half really...
Letiz?
What's up, Jeff?
Run for it!
What the...
Move over football, Cheltenham coming through. And Sky Bet are on the charge, with money back as actual cash, up to £10 if you lose on the first race of the festival. Sky Bet, that's betting better. Applies to first bet on first race at Cheltenham on losing singles and win part of each way singles only. Money back as cash, free bet stakes excluded, eligibility restrictions, T's and C's apply. 18 plus, begambleaware.org.
Conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Paul Allen.
Saudi Arabia's planned production boost has implications for global producers and buyers alike. Joining us to assess the impact now is Katie Bays, co-founder of consulting firm Sandhill Strategy. OPEC Plus apparently at war with itself. Where do you see oil prices heading from here?
Yeah, OPEC Plus is at war with itself. They're going to war with U.S. shale, something that they've avoided doing since they cut production in 2016. The floor is kind of up for grabs because what the market is trying to figure out now is how low do crude prices have to fall to discourage U.S. producers from pumping more oil. We haven't found that floor since 2008, so the question will really be, is $20 low enough? It's a dire situation for the market now to try to work its way out of a major oversupply with demand uncertain as well due to coronavirus.
So finding the floor, one question. I guess another question is, once it's found, how long is it going to endure?
When you look at where oil markets are and what commodity prices are trying to tell you, in a lot of ways, commodity prices can be a vote of confidence in an industry. And I think with commodity prices low and plunging further, that's a good signal that the market is not confident in energy's role long term.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Oil prices are plummeting while equities plunge and currencies and bonds see wild moves as the world heads for a full-blown price war in crude, and panic appears to grip financial markets. S&P futures fell about 5%, triggering trading curbs. Right now, they're down 145 points, down 4.9%. Dow futures are down 1,255 points. NASDAQ futures down 410. The DAX in Germany is down 6.6%. The CAC in Paris down 7%, and the FTSE 100 down 6.8%. 10-year Treasury up 3 2/32. The yield 0.45%. Yield on the 2-year 0.31%, and the 30-year yield 0.86%. NYMEX crude oil is down 23% on $9.53 at $31.74 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.2% or $3.60 at $16.76.60 an ounce. The euro 1.1434 against the dollar, and the yen 102.22. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's John Tucker with more on what's going on around the world. John.
Good morning, Karen. Mayor Bill de Blasio says New Yorkers should avoid the subway at rush hour, cycle or walk to work, or stay home and telecommute. New York City has 13 confirmed cases of coronavirus. Senators Ted Cruz and Paul Gosar will undergo self-quarantine after attending a conference with someone who tested positive. Cases in Seattle and its suburbs have jumped to 83, and 2 additional people have died. Ahead of tomorrow's primary contest, Kamala Harris has endorsed Joe Biden. The Reverend Jesse Jackson has endorsed Bernie Sanders. Sports, Knicks beat the Pistons. Next, top the Bulls. Celtics lost to the Thunder. Wizards fell to Miami. The Kings lost to the Raptors. And on the ice, the Sharks fell to the Avalanche. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, John, thank you. It's 6:19 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Let's get you set for the trading day and week ahead with our global Bloomberg News Roundtable. For that, we're joined this morning by European News Director David Merritt in London. In New York, Joe Weisenthal, head of our Americas News Desk, is with us. And from Hong Kong, we're pleased to have Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor Madeline Lim. Let's start with you, David, because when the markets opened in Europe this morning, we saw them heading close to a bear market with this oil price war just adding on to concerns over the coronavirus.
That's right. Woke up to historic moves across all markets this morning, prompted mostly by this huge crash in the price of oil. That was after Saudi Arabia launched a full-on price war over the weekend, following the collapse of the OPEC Plus talks at the end of last week. You have to go back to 1991 and the first Gulf War to see such a big move in the oil price. It's rippled across all financial markets. As you said, many equity markets in Europe slipping into bear market territory. The whole of the US curve for treasuries under 1% for the first time, and currencies also a big surge into the yen, for example. So big moves this morning as a result of this, which comes on top, of course, of all the uncertainty surrounding the coronavirus.
And it looks as though, Joe, we're going to see big moves lower here in the U.S., but it's not exactly clear what they'll be because we hit the 5% down limit overnight.
Yeah, basically right away after futures started trading last night, we hit the down limit, and so we are maxed down on the futures. Don't know how much lower we're going to go when cash equity starts trading. One thing you can look at, however, for the S&P is the SPY ETF, which is down 6.3% pre-market. So there are other proxies. It's going to be worse than what the futures are pointing to right now.
And Madeline Lim with us from Hong Kong. One effect of this is a flight to safety. We've seen some really big moves in the yen this morning against the dollar.
Indeed, and with the yen sort of closing in at one point, closing in on its 100 level against the dollar, which is the level where the Bank of Japan and the monetary authorities in Japan are likely to intervene, or thought to be intervening at least, because the last thing the Japanese economy needs right now is a strong currency, given that they had economic data, GDP data today for the fourth quarter shrank by even more than initially reported, by around 7% on an annualized basis. Nobody thinks that given the coronavirus and given the market turmoil that this quarter is going to be, the first quarter is going to be much better, which would put Japan technically in a recession. So they're looking at this currency and probably not welcoming its strength right now, Nathan.
Yeah, we're looking at recession indicators as well here in the U.S., Joe Weisenthal. David mentioned that the entire U.S. yield curve is under 1% right now. You got to think that's going to be putting more pressure on central banks globally.
Breathtaking moves in the U.S. Treasury market. Right now, 30-year yield quoted at just 85 basis points. At one point earlier, U.S. 10-year yield actually currently just 45 basis points, falling below 50 basis points. These are numbers that were unimaginable a week ago, unimaginable, and yet here they are. Pressure on central banks, and you could make the argument that the market is screaming at the government to spend money, fiscal stimulus. They're borrowing for free, literally, virtually at this point. You could argue that is really what the market wants to see.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a question of whether we could start to see negative yield in the U.S. That's been a story in Europe for some time now.
If the right now we know that members of the FOMC do not like the idea of negative interest rate policy. Anything is conceivable, but I think the expectation is that there are many other tools they're likely to try, including more asset purchases, more aggressive forms of forward guidance before they would go to negative policy rates, but you never know.
Yeah, we'll hear from the European Central Bank later on this week, David Merritt, and the big question always for them is whether they still have policy tools left.
That's right. We're already, of course, have negative yields. Benchmark rate is minus 0.5% in Europe. But now many bank economists saying they're going to have to cut that even deeper into negative territory, expecting maybe 10 basis points later this week when they meet on Thursday. It seems they're going to have to do something. Recession risk really looming again in Europe. But as Joe just said, not only calls for the central bank to act, but also for governments to step in with more fiscal measures, some spending to really get these economies moving again when we've got recession expectations now in Italy and in France, in Germany. So central banks and governments expecting to hear how they're going to step in to shore things up at some point this week.
David Merritt, European News Director for Bloomberg News, joining us from London this morning. Also, thanks to Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor Madeline Lim in Hong Kong and Joe Weisenthal, head of our America's News Desk, joining us from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York City. As we take a look at markets this morning, S&P futures are lower by 145 points. Dow futures down 1,255. NASDAQ futures lower by 410 points. You are listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. We are seeing remarkable losses in global stocks, the stock futures, and oil, as plummeting crude prices add to the backdrop of dread surrounding the coronavirus and the specter of a global recession rising. The futures losses today triggered exchange rules that limited declines at 5%. Crude oil is above $32 a barrel after dropping the most since the Gulf War. The circuit breakers triggered the limits today, but they're also leaving traders in the dark as to just how big the losses may eventually get. And for the first time, the 10-year Treasury yield fell below 0.5%. The 30-year yield dropped under 1%. Apple CEO Tim Cook is offering employees at most of its global offices the ability to work from home and called the coronavirus outbreak an unprecedented event and a challenging moment. He told employees at several global offices to work remotely if they could, and said the company was working to reduce large gatherings and engage in deep cleaning. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Delayed at the dentist and now you're late for school pickup. You need a free now. Need to take the dog to the vet before lunch. Should have gotten a free now. Trying to get 4 kids and their baggage to the airport. Free now. Sometimes you can't get from A to B fast enough. Download the Free Now app today for quick pickups and reliable drivers, no matter the situation. Less hassle, more hustle with Free Now.
Hey, have you heard? The Mayor of London has launched his latest van scrappage scheme to help tackle London's toxic air. Small businesses or sole traders like me with a polluting van could now get £7,000, which you could use to trade up to a Euro 6 vehicle. And you could get an extra £2,500 towards running costs if you go electric. The scheme is now even easier to qualify for, and it's open to any businesses with up to 50 employees, like mine. So, I'm going to search TfL scrappage to see if I'm eligible and apply. You should do the same. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Matt Le Tissier, what did you make of that performance today?
Well, it really was a game of two halves, to be honest, Jeff. Leicester came out in the first half really...
Letice?
What's up, Jeff?
Run for it!
What the...
Move over, football. Cheltenham coming through. And Sky Bet are on the charge, with money back as actual cash, up to £10 if you lose on the first race of the festival. Sky Bet. That's betting better. Applies to first bet on first race at Cheltenham on losing singles and win part of each way singles only. Money back as cash, free bet stakes excluded, eligibility restrictions, T's and C's apply. 18 plus, begambleaware.org.
Think you've seen a fridge freezer before? Just look at this LG InstaView door-in-door. Knock twice on the fridge door and you can see what's inside without even opening it. How cool is that? All LG fridge freezers keep everything fresher for longer with innovative cooling. More taste, less waste. And with all LG appliances, you can save up to £100 when you trade in your old one. Heroes of the home at Curry's PC World. Full terms at currys.co.uk.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
It's 6:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We are just about 3 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures and global stocks are plunging. Circuit breakers for U.S. stock futures triggered trading limits overnight after declines reached 5%. That has us in the dark on what losses could look like at the open.
Well, in Europe right now, the stock 600 is lower by 5.8%. The DAX in Germany down 6.1%. The FTSE in London down 6.25%.
Oil is crashing as an all-out price war breaks out between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Collapse of the OPEC Plus alliance has the Saudi kingdom making the deepest price cuts in at least 20 years. Garfield Reynolds is a market strategist for Bloomberg.
In gold terms, oil is now the lowest it's ever been, basically, lowest since Bretton Woods. So I think we could call this a panic.
And that panic has West Texas Intermediate crude down almost 22% at $32.34 a barrel. Brent is down more than 20% at $35.90.
Bond yields around the world are tumbling. In the UK, 2-year yields have gone negative, while yields in Germany and France push deeper into negative territory. Paya Sacheva is an economist at Schroders.
We do expect the ECB to embark stimulus measures on Thursday beyond even just a 10 basis point rate cut, but likely some targeted measures from SMEs, potentially expanding their current quantitative easing program. But beyond that, we're going to need essentially a bazooka now, I think, to assuage markets in this current environment.
In the U.S., the entire yield curve is trading below 1% for the first time ever as markets expect the Fed to cut rates to zero in the coming months. Richard Jones is an FX and rates strategist for Bloomberg.
There's now roughly another 100 basis points of easing priced between now and the end of the year, with the market pricing about 75 basis points of these rate cuts to happen in the coming weeks. So very aggressive, very front-loaded.
Right now, the yield on 2-year treasuries is trading at 0.29%. 10-year yields are currently at 0.45%, and the 30-year yield 0.86%.
And as panic grips financial markets, the Trump administration is drafting measures to blunt the economic fallout from the coronavirus. Here with details is Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
The measures would include a temporary expansion of paid sick leave and help for companies facing disruption from the outbreak. That's according to sources who tell us a small group of officials worked on the proposal over the weekend. The package is still being debated and has not yet been presented to President Trump. I'm Tom Busby, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Tom, thank you. And a programming note, tune in this morning when Mohammed Al-Arian weighs in on these dramatic moves in the markets. The Allianz chief economic advisor and Bloomberg opinion columnist joins us at 8 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks, Karen. It's 6:33 on Wall Street, and this news update is brought to you by Land Rover. The Own the Adventure sales event is happening now until March 31st. Visit your tri-state area Land Rover retailer for details on the new Discovery Sport. Land Rover, above and beyond. Here's John Tucker.
Nathan, the U.S. death toll from coronavirus has hit 21. As testing increased, the number of infections in the United States has climbed above 500. The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director Dr. Anthony Fauci cautions a vaccine is likely a year or more away.
For now, the answer is not going to be a vaccine. If, in fact, we go into a cycle where we come back next year, then we likely would have some opportunity for a vaccine.
Andrew Cuomo says more than 100 people have tested positive for coronavirus in New York State. He complains one of 7 labs in the state with the ability to test isn't approved by federal officials.
CDC has not authorized the use of this lab, which is just outrageous and ludicrous.
Cuomo declared a state of emergency. The largest concentration of cases in New York is in Westchester County, and New York City officials say residents should avoid the subway at rush hour. The new coronavirus causes little more than a cough if it stays in the nose and throat. The danger begins when it reaches the lungs. Let's get more in this report from Hong Kong at Bloomberg's Brian Curtis.
1 in 7 patients has difficulty breathing. 1 in 16 becomes critical. These patients suffer respiratory failure, and some develop septic shock. The infection usually starts in the nose, from droplets expelled in a sick person's cough, sneeze, or breath. If the virus stays in the upper airway, patients are usually okay. But if it makes it down to the lower respiratory tract, then it becomes serious. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Daybreak.
California Governor Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Oakland are seeking to reassure the public that none of the passengers from a ship with at least 21 cases of the new coronavirus will be released into the public before undergoing a 14-day quarantine. It docks in Oakland this morning. Two members of Congress, Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Paul Gosar, say they're isolating themselves after determining they had contact at a political conference with a man who was tested positive for the virus. In other news, on the political front, Joe Biden's newfound momentum could bring him an insurmountable lead in delegates by mid-March, buoyed by primary wins on Super Tuesday. Biden's now well-positioned to extend his delegate advantage over Bernie Sanders at the 6th nominating contest that will be held tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, John. We're coming up to 6:36 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update with John Stashauer.
Nathan, Knicks and Nets, both with home victories. They both now have interim head coaches. Mike Miller's been on the job for 3 months. Last night at the Garden, he coached the Knicks to a 96-84 win over Detroit. Julius Randle scored 22, and the Knicks get 20 wins on the season. That's some progress. They only had 17 last year. The Nets made the playoffs last year, and despite a sub-500 record, are almost certainly headed back. But Kenny Atkinson, no longer the coach, in what they called a mutual parting of the ways. Assistant Jacques Vaughn has taken over. In his first game, the Nets beat Chicago at Barclays 110-107. Spencer Dinwiddie had 24 points. Joe Harris and Karis LeVert both scored 23. The Nets will visit the red-hot Lakers tomorrow. What a weekend for them. They beat the league-leading Bucks, and then yesterday they downed the Clippers, who they had lost to twice this season, 112-103. LeBron James scored 28. Injured much of last season, but at age 35, LeBron playing like an MVP.
I put a lot of work into my game this offseason. I put a lot of work into my rehabbing, with my groin. Getting back to full strength, even when I was shooting a movie. If you follow me on social media, I was in the weight room at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, making sure that I was preparing myself for this season, no matter what was going on, just keeping the main thing.
Lakers won 11 of the last 12. In Florida, Noah Syndergaard and the Mets beat the Astros 3-1. Masahiro Tanaka and the Yankees 1-0 over the Braves. Gary Sanchez's sore back, not believed to be serious, should return this week. The Brit Tyrell Hatton held on, won the Arnold Palmer Golf at Bay Hill by a shot over Mark Leishman by 2 over Sungjae Im, who was trying to win back-to-back weeks. Rory McIlroy collapsed yesterday at final round 76. With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashauer. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. 6:37 on Wall Street.
The following commentary is from Bloomberg Opinion.
Virus-stricken markets couldn't care less about jobs blowout. I'm Brian Chapata, a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. In ordinary times, February's U.S. jobs data would have been labeled as nothing short of a blowout. Treasury yields would have climbed, with the expectation that the Federal Reserve would leave interest rates alone and let the labor market run hot. Needless to say, these are far from normal times. The Labor Department's employment report revealed strong numbers across the board. That didn't matter to traders in the world's biggest bond market. Their world had long since changed, thanks to the coronavirus. The benchmark 10-year Treasury yield, which was already lower by almost 20 basis points, barely budged at 0.75%. Bond traders have long been pessimistic about the outlook for the world economy. As of now, treasuries are priced for a dire economic scenario that will force the Fed to drop interest rates towards zero. The strong February jobs report apparently didn't do much to calm those fears. If bond traders are right in their outlook, this data might have provided a glimpse at the recent top of the U.S. economy. I'm Brian Chapata. For more opinion, please go to Bloomberg.com/opinion or OPI and Go on the Bloomberg terminal.
This has been Bloomberg Opinion.
You can hear Bloomberg Opinion commentaries every weekday at this time. Terminal customers can read more at OPI and Go. Just before 6:39 on Wall Street, time for the Bloomberg Green Report. Here's Bob Moon.
He hasn't exactly been tilting at windmills, but President Trump has been a man on a quest to save the coal industry.
I love your grit, your spirit, and I love our coal miners, and they're coming back strong.
But his critics haven't exactly been surprised to see his lance get caught up in the blades of increasingly popular wind turbines and the inexorable advance to other cleaner forms of energy. In its latest look at U.S. coal use, the Energy Information Administration reports consumption plunged more than 13% in 2019, the most in 65 years since Dwight Eisenhower's administration. More of the same is expected this year. Utilities have already announced plans this year to shut at least 7 more coal-fired power plants. It's no surprise, really, with coal struggling to compete on price with natural gas, wind, and solar, and the dirtiest fossil fuel adding to climate change emissions. President Trump has claimed repeatedly he's revived the industry. The facts prove otherwise. That's the Bloomberg Green Business Report. I'm Bob Moon.
Okay, Bob, thank you. And coming up this week, economic data that could illustrate the impact of the coronavirus on business and consumer confidence. Here with more is Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Fear of the unknown. Look for that in this week's editions of the Small Business Optimism Index, the Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index, and the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. Firms see the coronavirus as a potential risk, according to the Federal Reserve's Beige Book survey. Last week's Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index dropped to a 10-week low, for example. Also this week, look for government data on inflation. Bloomberg customers can find a full list of economic indicators by typing ECO-GO in the Bloomberg terminal. Vinny Dowd-Judice, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Vinny, thank you. S&P futures are lower by 144 points, a drop of 4.9%. Dow futures also down 4.9%, or 1,255 points. NASDAQ futures are lower by 410 points. That is a drop of 4.8%. This is Bloomberg.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
On average, in London, a scooter or motorbike is stolen every hour. Make sure it's not yours. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
We've all been in one, but how much do you really know about black cabs? For instance, did you know that a black cab has to be tall enough to accommodate an individual wearing a bowler hat? That's a lot of space for you and your briefcase. Or that Free Now drivers can use the bus lanes, the perfect getaway to make your meeting in time. And with 2-minute central London pickups, you needn't waste time searching for a taxi. Just download the Free Now app today and take the hassle out of getting round London.
What am I saving for? My passion. Food photography.
I trained to be a landscape garden designer.
Open a food stall and sell my famous fish tacos.
I go to stuntman school.
I'd be a wedding planner. I'd start a dog grooming business. Sorry, we'd start a dog grooming business.
What are you waiting for? Make your one day happen with a Fidelity Stocks and Shares ISA. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules may change. Full terms for our stocks and shares ISA are available on our website. 18 plus UK residents.
Dust. It gets everywhere. Look up there on the shelves. You need powerful help from your new hero. The lightest cordless stick hoover ever. The H3500 weighs little more than a kitten. It leaps between your staircase spindles, slides down the canyons in your curtains, and slips niftily into a kitchen cupboard. You also get a 1 in 10 chance of winning £250 cash when you buy any Hoover cordless vacuum. Heroes of the home at Curry's PC World. Terms and register at curryswin250.co.uk.
Peoples of London,
Are you like Sergey, working your balls off from 9 to 5, then cooking for whole family? Well, I, Alexander, have taken responsibility for tonight's splendid evening meal.
Ooh, let me guess. Meerkat meals?
Of course. You know how I roll. Get 2 for 1 on food with Meerkat meals at your local favorites. Like the yacht, when you buy through Compare the Market. Qualifying purchase, app only, 2 for 1 on selected food, participating restaurants, a la carte only, Sunday to Thursday, T's and C's and exclusions apply.
Makers to a network of news and financial information 24 hours a day. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
Stock markets in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe have all seen dramatically steep losses in their Monday trading, with U.S. stock futures pointing to a potentially brutal day on Wall Street. Christine Romans checks the immediate cause for us.
The oil market is crashing. We haven't seen a crash like this since 1991. This is really dramatic, and this has to do with an oil price war happening over the weekend between Saudi Arabia and Russia. What does this mean for consumers? It means lower gas prices. What does it mean for jobs in America and the shale oil industry? Probably bankruptcies and job losses. This is a very big deal that we're seeing happening here.
U.S. stock futures are off around 5%. The Dow off over 1,200 points. The NASDAQ futures down 410. S&P futures are off 145 points in pre-market trading. The Grand Princess cruise ship will dock at Oakland, California today, carrying at least 21 passengers with the coronavirus. Governor Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Oakland say no passengers will be allowed in public before a 14-day quarantine. I'm Michael Toscano.
They don't just talk to the most important people.
Is it as ominous this time around?
They talk with the most interesting people.
Are they taking this seriously?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow, and oil prices are plummeting, equities are plunging, and futures are falling after triggering trading curbs. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. Let's go to the first word breaking news desk for today's morning call as well. Here's Bill Maloney. Bill, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. That's right. U.S. futures are limit down right now. Dow futures down 1,255 points. S&P's dropped 145, and NASDAQ futures declined by 410. The U.S. 10-year yield now at 0.46%. Gold is trading little change, and crude plunged as much as 31% in the worst loss since 1991 as a price war erupted between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Note that ExxonMobil and Chevron are each down 11% in the pre-market. Japan fell 5% overnight, while in European markets, Italy is down 10%. Back in the U.S., nothing to report on the U.S. economic front. And regarding earnings this morning, Thor Industries Q2 net sales beat the highest estimates. Wrapping things up, American Express was raised to outperform at Robert Baird, and Brown-Forman cut to underweight over at Morgan Stanley. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Karen?
All right, Bill, thank you. And here live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type squawk on your terminal, SQUAWK. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's John Tucker with more on what's going on around the world. John.
And Karen, Mayor Bill de Blasio says New Yorkers should avoid the subway at rush hour, cycle or walk to work, or stay home and telecommute. New York City has 13 confirmed cases of coronavirus. The state has 105. Columbia suspended classes today and tomorrow. Senator Ted Cruz will self-quarantine after attending a conference with someone who tested positive for coronavirus. Ahead of tomorrow's primary contest, Kamala Harris has endorsed Joe Biden. The Reverend Jesse Jackson has endorsed Bernie Sanders. Sports, Knicks beat the Pistons. The Nets beat the Bulls. The Celtics lost to the Thunder. The Wizards fell to Miami. And the Kings lost to the Raptors. On the ice, the Sharks fell to the Avalanche. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. We're live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios. We're at 6:49 on Wall Street. Time now to check what's going on in D.C., where the Trump administration continues to grapple with the coronavirus outbreak. Dr. Anthony Fauci with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases is on President Trump's coronavirus task force.
I think we're getting a better sense as the day goes by. Unfortunately, that better sense is not encouraging because we're seeing community spread.
Fauci tells NBC's Meet the Press the U.S. isn't likely to impose the kind of draconian containment measures that China did, but he does say this on Fox News Sunday.
If we continue to get cases like this, particularly at the community level, there will be what we call mitigation, where you'll have to do essentially social distancing, keep people out of crowded places, take a look at seriousness. Do you really need to travel?
One cruise ship with at least 21 infected people is expected to dock in Oakland, California today. Fauci says he's recommended getting those people off and into quarantine so the ship doesn't turn into a hotspot. Housing Secretary Ben Carson tells ABC's This Week.
The Vice President met with the CEOs of the major cruise ship companies yesterday, and they are coming up with a plan within 72 hours of that meeting.
The ship's docking tomorrow.
The plan will be in place by that time, but I don't want to preview the plan right now.
Washington State is dealing with the most U.S. deaths from the coronavirus. Governor Jay Inslee tells CBS's Face the Nation he appreciates the federal response even after President Trump used an appearance at the CDC to call him a snake.
I really don't care too much what Donald Trump thinks of me, and we just kind of ignore that. It's background noise because we really need to work together, Republicans and Democrats. This is a national crisis.
As for the presidential race, it's on to Michigan for Bernie Sanders after Joe Biden's wins on Super Tuesday. Sanders surprised Hillary Clinton in Michigan 4 years ago, but he tells Meet the Press the state isn't make or break for him this year.
I'm very proud that a year after I introduced this campaign, a campaign which has taken on Wall Street and the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance companies, you know what? We're just a few delegates behind Joe Biden, and we got a real shot to win this.
And that is some of the conversation from the political shows heard every Sunday on Bloomberg Radio. NBC's Meet the Press at 11 a.m. Wall Street time, Fox News Sunday at noon, ABC's This Week at 1 p.m., and Face the Nation from CBS at 2 o'clock. For more, we're joined live by Bloomberg U.S. Politics editor Kathleen Hunter. And as we continue to watch headlines roll in related to the coronavirus, Kate, it is starting to hit close to home now, with a couple of Capitol Hill lawmakers saying they're going to go ahead and self-quarantine.
That's right. We have Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Paul Gosar who are saying that they're going to self-quarantine as a result of some interaction that they had with an unidentified person at the CPAC conference. That person is now tested positive. It sounds as though Cruz's interaction was very limited, basically just a hello and a handshake, but that Gosar's interaction was perhaps more